All right, welcome. Thank you. Glad to see you all here. All right, welcome. Sorry about that. Had a little bit of tech issues there at the beginning. Trying to find my Kazamara. How y'all doing? What's up? What a disaster stream. So I forced myself to watch almost all of that Taylor Marshall stream. And we're going to be dealing with that tonight. We've got, or today, whatever this is. We got our ortho bro, Snek. What's up, Snek?
Yeah, doing all right. Just dealing with the epidemic of cringe. This was really hard to watch. A lot of
It was.
witness. Yeah, it was painful, and we even rewatched it with the Red Mad White and Lewis, and yeah, it took so long. There's so much things that are wrong. So much self-own. So much dishonesty. But we're gonna cover this. It's gonna take a while, though.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, so let's make sure everybody can hear Snek pretty good before we get to going. Can you guys hear Snek? Was that good? Is his volume clear before we roll with the madness? It's all good?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I had to accidentally deleted the window capture, so. All right, we're here. We're back. We're good. So, this stream was all over the place. We're going to just launch into it because we have a whole lot of information that we're going to cover. We're going to cover
Yeah.
all the points point by point. Hopefully, we can make it as quick as possible. I know you guys are out there and are probably not interested in hearing a 4-hour stream rebutting every silly point in this disaster talk. Now, I want to say my preface was I actually expected better from these guys. I actually expected that we would have a pretty in-depth historical and theological kind of claim analysis rebutting the different points about the papacy and getting into the specifics of created grace or uncreated energies. But no, we didn't get any of that. We got a lot of emotional appeals. We got a lot of just completely wrong claims, a lot of confusion, a lot of mischaracterizations. And so we're going to deal with all of them. We're not going to do like the James White thing where we just kind of blandly brush aside and say that it was all misrepresentation, which I didn't misrepresent Calvinism, by the way. But we're going to deal with these point by point. Now, David, the real Med White, shout out to him. Shout out to Lewis. By the way, I'll give Lewis a wrench, but where is Lewis's... what's his handle? I don't know his handle, so otherwise I'll give him a wrench. Where's his handle? Anyway, we're going to deal with it point by point. So let's launch into this. I'm going to make, we'll go back and forth. I'm going to make my analysis of a point that they make, and then you can give yours, and then back and forth. And by the way, ML had a great quote. What's up, ML? Shout out. I thought your analysis of the essential problem of this Platonic form thing was a great quote. We will touch on that because they're essentially doing the same thing as the set of a contest, and that's what we're gonna
Yeah.
we're gonna yeah. So we'll get to that here in a minute. But again, where is I'll give Sebastian a wrench too. Let's see. Where's Lewis's traditional Christian? Okay.
Yeah, so we're gonna
Oh,
cover
that's
this
Lewis.
point by
Okay, so
point.
yeah, go
We
ahead.
already made
You can start. You can start. So you go ahead.
a show basically with the Med White and Lewis, where we try to lump up each point into big problems. We might be a bit more thorough in this live, or there's even probably some points that Med White's a great insight. So I suggest you watch it alongside this one.
Yeah, I listened to all y'all stream. I enjoyed that. You made a lot of good points. I made notes on your stream, on their stream, and I got my own input. So let's start out with the beginning. Where's my beginning of his talk? Okay, so the Roman Catholic Church, he says, avoids let's start with his first claim. It's an issue of pride. So he gives this kind of background story of how he was Antiochian. He was received as an Ochian. And by the way, I do want to mention, when it comes to Flanders' background, that he wasn't a ecumenist. He actually did grad studies in ecumenism. He did grad studies in ecumenism in relationship in some way to the Catholic University of Ukraine, which would directly tie him to a lot of the controversy in the Ukraine. I'm not saying that Flanders is directly involved in that. I'm just saying that university, we know, is a hub for the West, NATO, and the promotion of ecumenism. And ecumenism is one of the weapons, one of the things that's being used in the Ukraine right now. It's the Uniates, the Jesuits, the Roman Catholics, and then the NATO-created schism there. Which is ironic because we're going to talk about Caesaropapism. We're actually going to see that the Roman Catholic Church is one of the greatest examples of Caesaropapism in the history of the world. But the first problem with this claim, with this stream, was that he comes out of the bat with, "I was at the liturgy and I was praying the many Lord have mercies, and it struck me. God spoke to me that the issue of the schism was my own pride." Now, if you go back and you read Flanders' old blog posts, it's all full of ecumenism, right? So he went into orthodoxy with the presuppositions of ecumenism, studying ecumenism at basically a CIA-connected university in the Ukraine, all about ecumenism. So the idea that he neutrally sort of became Orthodox and then he was immersed in this world without any sort of motivations is not true, because he was an ecumenist, and he was always an ecumenist, and the blog posts going all the way back are ecumenists. And so we have to point out right away that just as a Roman Catholic in their trad world would critique an ecumenist, so would we as Orthodox point out that you're not on neutral ground. We can question your orthodoxy if you are studying masters in ecumenism or whatever and going to a NATO CIA university dedicated to ecumenism. And then you spend many years in orthodoxy as an ecumenist working to heal the schism. So I'm not interested in questioning his motives. I'm just questioning the paradigm that he comes from.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, my notes started a bit earlier, but we were going to touch on that later. But he makes a lot of claims about the churches, and that stems from ecumenism. So, for example, and here I'm quoting his life as the first big problem. Is that he says, "What exists in the East is not a single church with a single doctrine, praxis, morals, and government, but 14 Chalcedonian churches, 6 non-Chalcedonian churches, and 1 Assyrian church, in addition to millions of old believers, all calendarists, and such other groups." So here, it does something like it's very improper, because he confuses communion, which is what the church is about, to geography. And we see that they do it oftentimes in the stream, a lot of times. And in his criticism of Eastern Orthodoxy, he brings up the Orientals. But this is weird, because I thought that the Orientals left after Chalcedon, and I thought that Chalcedon was a united church.
Yeah,
And
this is the first big problem. Exactly, Snek. I mean, the accusation is that there are multiple schismatic Orthodox claiming churches. And yet the problem is that these schisms occurred, in his mind, when it was a Roman Catholic Church, right? In his mind, the first millennium of the church is the Roman Catholic Church. And so to cite these as, quote, schisms of the Orthodox Church is utterly stupid. I mean, that's like right away a totally bogus argument on his own grounds.
Yeah, and the worst part is that he complains and he even goes into Soloviev, which has the idea that every schism is based on pride and every schism by definition is bad. But here, by blaming it on us, is causing a schism hundreds of years before the actual schism happens, because you see that everything that is good in the United Church, he will claim for Rome, or that he will claim a lot of things, a lot of good things that happen in the West, which was the Orthodox West at the time, the United Church. To be specifically Roman, and everything that's bad that happens in the East will be, specifically Orthodox, which is already contradicting his church view, because according to them, we started popping into existence after the schism. But here, not only is he saying that we existed before, but he's already splitting the church. So this is a geographic understanding. It's very wrong, because it's saying that Rome was never a universal church. It's conflating the Catholic Church and the undivided church with the Roman Patriarchate alone, which is a huge problem. So here we already see that there's a lack of knowledge of early church history, especially the first 1,000 years.
Yeah, and I want to point out too, from a logical perspective, which, by the way, the Roman Catholic Church is grounded in a classical foundationalist epistemology, not just in their acceptance by Leo XIII of the Thomistic system of philosophy, but also at Vatican I, you have the acceptance of the normative way that religious claims are true is through just going and investigating the evidence. In fact, he's wrong when he says that the way that the Roman Catholic Church is true is to just not worry. He literally says to not worry about the objective evidence, because that's just going to turn into people fighting with one another and throwing disputed documents back and forth. You just pray about it, literally like a Mormon level tier argument. Like, there's a burning in my bosom when I prayed about it. And so I knew that the issue was my own pride. Well, that is not an argument. That is a subjective emotional appeal. It's a form of emotional appeal, not a valid argument for how we would know the papacy is true. And in fact, the papacy itself, when it defines how we know the papacy is true, at the beginning of Vatican I, it talks about the fact that you just go and you investigate the history of religions and the history of the institution of the papacy, and it will be manifest to everybody who looks at the evidence that it's the true historical continuous teacher of the faithful, and it's never erred, and all this stuff, all the claims of Vatican I, right? So he doesn't even use the Vatican I definition of how we're supposed to know that the Roman Catholic Church is the true church. He uses a subjective appeal. And that's what really stuck out to me throughout this discussion, was that there was almost no theology in this. It was all about problems in history, subjective emotional appeals, and the ultimate claim, which we'll eventually get to, which is just that it's a pragmatic thing, bro. Look, we just need a pope. Come on, right? We just need the pope and it'll solve the problems. But we're going to see that their own stream, everything Taylor Marshall is about, disproves that claim, because he spends his whole ministry now fighting against Frank as a trad, right? So Taylor Marshall's on the trad trek, which many of us have been on at some point, right? Taylor Marshall's at about where I was at in about 2003 or 4, right? I was just at 2003 is when I first started going to the SSPX Latin Mass, and Marshall is edging towards, right, this kind of SSPX position, right? I mean, he's not there yet, whatever. He's putting himself as the face of kind of the recognize and resist view on the papacy. But we'll get to all that Vatican II stuff later. I just want to point out that the way it started out, it just really started sinking quick, and I really expected better from these guys. They're supposed to be representatives, but the mere fact that they think Eric Ibarra is the best Roman Catholic apologist, I think says a lot. Eric Ibarra is a plagiarist, and he's terrible.
Yeah. So yes, actually, the stream starts to deconstruct and dissolve itself quite fast, and it starts the beginnings. They start to contradict each other. So in the same breath, at 13 minutes, when he explains his background, Flanders would say that emotionalism is bad, and then he will go on. He will go on saying that actually the reason for his conversion is emotional. which is great. He even contradicts himself when he introduces his run, at
So he begins by saying that you got to be consistent. The Orthodox Church is full of contradictions, and then he turns around and uses an emotional appeal and contradicts himself. So it's back and forth. There's not a lot of consistency in this argumentation. But let's move on to the next problem, which is his next claim is the Orthodox Church is a whole bunch of different churches. Again, that's not true. And by the way, the idiocy on their part in terms of their own church, I think was pretty amazing, because it's almost like they had no knowledge of Uniatism. Right now, I mean, Flanders knows about the Uniates and whatnot, but Taylor Marshall seemed to be completely lost in this realm. And the idea that there aren't national churches or national pride, or that there's not national ism, you could say, within the world of Roman Catholicism is laughable. And by the way, they don't even know about all the problems within the world of Uniatism, how Uniatism has multiple contradictory claims. Uniatism, many of the Uniates, they don't accept Trent. They will revere people that for centuries were considered heretical in the Roman Catholic Church. They revere people in their liturgies that are officially heretical. And then, as you pointed out, I did want to mention too the point about Isaac the Syrian. Now, this is really one of the key ways to, I think, totally deconstruct their stream, was the Taylor Marshall's ignorance on his own church comes to the fore when we look at Saint Isaac the Syrian, right? He thought he got this gotcha on people, right? The Orthodox accept Saint Isaac as an Nestorian saint, just saying, like he thought this was a big gotcha moment. Why is that not a gotcha moment?
Yeah, it's awful. And what's great with the Unions is that every single, like, he will criticize our theology. Actually, that's probably why he doesn't want to criticize it too much in this stream. But Dr. Taylor Marshall will criticize our theology. He will criticize our saints. He can even criticize our right. But the problem is, even our discipline. But the problem is, ultimately, the Unions have the same saint as us. They have the same rights as us. They have the same discipline as us. The only difference is that they submit to the Pope. So actually, in attacking us on something else than the papacy, he will actually attack his own church.
He's attacking his own church, and he doesn't realize. Yeah, exactly. He doesn't realize his own church has multiple confessions of faith and multiple contradictory claims about who saints are. So that was the first big gaffe that he made right away. But let's get back to Flanders. So. The other thing about this stream was that it was full of the pot calling the kettle black, which now, if we were to just exchange like arguments based on problems in the church, that would be one thing, generally speaking, because you can always, you got this problem, well, you got this problem, you got that problem. Let's keep in mind that the Roman Catholic Church is a church built on a specific doctrine of the papacy. That is the key foundational doctrine. And they kind of stress that in their talk, obviously. But it's different when we talk about problems related to the magisterial claims of the papacy, right, and its contradictions. That's different than just talking about moral problems in this church versus moral problems in that church, right? So we could throw liberals back and forth all day, which ironically, they just cite a couple liberal theologians from the Orthodox sphere, and they act like that's the voice of all orthodoxy, right? Do we do that? No. If I could sit here and list James Martin quotes all day long and be like, oh, bro, we got you. But he is not. Does he represent the entirety of the Novus Ordo or traditional Catholicism? No, right? To be fair, he does not. But it does totally undermine the house of card system falls apart when we look at the magisterial and dogmatic statements of the popes. That's the key here. And by the way, Taylor Marshall has to understand, which I don't think he's gotten to this point yet, where he grasps that you do have to accept the ordinary universal magisterial teaching of the papacy, and that includes their canonization of saints. So you're going to have to accept John Paul II as a saint. You're going to have to accept Paul VI. You're going to have to accept John the 23rd as blessed or whatever he is. All of these innovators and all of these guys who brought about this crisis in the church, this apostasy that they admit and talk about, you have to accept them as saints. You can't reject ordinary universal magisterium, and canonizations are part of ordinary universal magisterium. So that means when he attacks uniate saints, who we revere as saints, he's attacking his own saints. That's a huge, stupid mistake.
Yeah, and then just to remind people, Uniatism is not a Vatican II thing.
Right.
It started way before. Like we've got the Medway telling us that yes, after Florence, they accepted leavened bread. They did several creeds, did different kind of liturgy. It is absolutely not a Vatican II thing. It's been like this for a while. And actually, they would say that, oh, actually we Latinized it, we removed stuff. There are several papal encyclicals that say that we cannot touch. They're right. We cannot touch the way they worship. And it shows to this day several creeds and stuff like this.
Right. Yeah. I had that in my notes later on. How can you claim to be the church with the magisterial faith of one, that you have one faith that will ensure and promote this unity when you have multiple creeds that your church confesses? Right. Uniates don't confess the filioque in the creed, but they're united to the rest of the world that professes the filioque in the creed. And supposedly we're supposed to think, well, it doesn't ultimately matter because these two things are reconcilable. Actually, we're going to see that the two positions aren't reconcilable later on. But I just want to point out this point that when you do the appeal to pride thing, it has, a sort of false piety emotional appeal. Like, well, I realized how prideful I was. And the root problem of all the Orthodox people is their pride, and they need to be converted to the Pope. And he actually appeals to original sin is what keeps us from being saved in union with the Pope. This is bizarre. What's original sin ultimately affect? I mean, I know that they would say that it's all of our sins, all of our actions against the divine law and moral law, etc., come from the root of original sin. But the whole force of this discourse consistently was Flanders saying that original sin is keeping you from recognizing the Pope, which will lead to your salvation. I mean, because at least as far as I understood, they're kind of trying to toy with the Feeneyite idea that there's no salvation outside the Roman Catholic communion, right? Which Vatican II is completely contrary to, by the way, and numerous papal statements after Vatican II are completely contrary to. And by the way, ecumenism did not begin at Vatican II. It began way earlier. Benedict XV was actually engaging in ecumenical actions early on. Benedict XV was a big supporter of the League of Nations. So I think the papacy, there was cracks in the papacy far earlier than just Vatican II, but that's a different topic. My point is just that the bizarre statements that original sin is what leads us to deny the Pope was hilarious, because this is really a vindication of the Orthodox claim that really Roman Catholicism is sola papam. It's all ultimately about defending the papacy. That's why Taylor Marshall, most of his streams are about trying to fix the problems in Rome and the papacy, right?
Yes, that's great, because all throughout the streams he compares us to Protestant, which will disagree. There's one who schismed, and we're going to discuss that when we'll talk about pride and stuff. But he calls us Protestant all throughout the stream. And then he makes an argument that sounds very Calvinistic. Oh, you're in total depravity, so by definition you are trying to you're trying to refuse the papacy. Like, it's literally the fall of Adam causes you to refuse the papacy.
Total depravity keeps you from being united with Frank, who they think, by the way, is pretty much a heretic, which is hilarious. So he lumps the Orthodox in with everybody else. All Orthodox are just like all the Oriental Orthodox, which is objectively not true. Even though there have been meetings, there's still not any official recognition of sacramental sharing or liturgical recognition in the diptychs, right? So none of that. So the fact that people meet, and by the way, Francis goes and prays in mosques. By his logic, Francis is a Muslim, right? Now, he's not going to admit that, but I would actually say maybe he is, right? Like a Freemasonic Muslim, because Francis goes and prays in the mosques. And Flanders' argument was literally that some Orthodox people will go to a Coptic church, therefore there is this sacramental sharing, and then he has to correct Taylor Marshall on the fact that their canon law actually allows them to go to schismatics to receive the sacraments in extreme cases, which, by the way, is an innovation.
They even have a right to lie in order to get Eucharist in other places. It also shows that they recognize that we have valid sacraments, which is one of the main thing about the church. Like if the sacraments work, if you have sacramental certainty, it means that you can attain salvation. You can wash your sins. You can be confessed.
Taylor
So
Marshall
this
doesn't even know that the 1983 Code of Canon Law and and Vatican II's allowances loosened this up to where you can go to receive sacraments from people that you are completely out of communion with. But that actually makes perfect sense if you're an ecumenist and you accept all the uniates. I mean, if uniates are accepted in the Roman Catholic Communion with completely different faith, different canons, and so forth, different saints, then of course you could. Why couldn't you go receive? In fact, they even have canons in extremis cases where you can be baptized. You can ask an atheist to baptize you if you're on the point of death, which is utterly ludicrous, right? Their whole ex operato system, which we'll get to in a minute with their misunderstanding of baptism. But I just want to point out that it was completely disingenuous to make the comparison to all of the Oriental Orthodox, or the fact that some people will go to a schismatic sect or something like that. And by the way, so all of those same problems that he thinks are problems in Orthodoxy exist in the world of Roman Catholicism, all over the place, not in extreme cases. I mean, if you are a Roman Catholic, you have within perhaps one diocese, let's see, I listed all my different options. I could go to the SSPX, which is split. And by the way, they can't decide or figure out if you can or can't go to the SSPX. If you're Novus Ordo, half of them think you can, half of them think you can't. So I could go to the SSPX, which itself is split between two people who want to go back to and reconcile with the papacy, and the Bishop Williamson crowd type who don't want to and still recognize the popes, right? I could go to a uniate church which doesn't accept multiple ecumenical councils as normative in their theology. They might give a verbal credence to it. Some of them will actually just outright deny it. They don't believe in purgatory. They don't care about Trent. They believe palimism, quote unquote. But I could. So is that the real Roman Catholic Church? I could go to
unity.
Yeah, I could go to
Unity.
I could go to an FSSP church, which is in communion with Rome, but has all the same ideas as the SSPX, because they're SSPX people who've been reconciled to Rome, right? So there's that Latin Mass. I could go to a conservative Novus Ordo church, which professes to have problems in Vatican II and do mental gymnastics on trying to reconcile Vatican II, but will still accept it. I could go to a Sedevacantist sect or chapel, perhaps in a big city, which themselves will all be split amongst one another, claiming to be Roman Catholic and claiming to have validity and valid orders. I could go to a diocesan Latin Mass, which is different from all of these and will perhaps have a different view than all of these people. Or perhaps I could even find a crazy conclavist Mass who perhaps has valid sacraments because perhaps their so-called pope was ordained in the pre-Vatican II rite. Or I could find a Jesuit clown Mass, hip-hop Mass that I could say is the Roman Catholic. So within one city, I have this vast array of completely different faiths and liturgies, beliefs, perspectives on a dogmatic council and the Pope for the last 60 years. But I'm supposed to believe that his analogy of some Orthodox people in the Antiochian church he saw one time go to a Coptic church, that's equivalent to what I just listed. Give me a break.
Yeah, and they will not have the same creed. They will not have the same theology. They will pray to saints. Like they celebrate Palamas, for example. Or if you go to the Nestorian, to the Chaldean Catholic, they might celebrate, Isaac the Syrian, who you call the Nestorian, despite him not being a Nestorian.
Right, he thinks it's not a saint in his church, even though the uniates accept it as. I mean, it's just nonsense, and it's like they don't even know what they're arguing against. They're just It's like the whole thing was like total basic bitch level stuff. Like they didn't even delve into anything with any substance, and that's because it was really just an appeal to the masses. It was like a very low level kind of like just hoping that nobody's going to actually go and check any of these claims. And just be swayed by, emotional appeals, basically. The next point is that we are prideful and we don't figure out what we can't forgive, and we have grudges. Again, another emotional appeal. And I want to keep stressing that there's a reason why Flanders says you cannot solve this matter. Don't look into history and the theology to solve this matter, because you're just going to go around in circles. It's not an issue of he says it's not an objective fact issue. Really? I thought that's what Vatican I says is the means and the way by which we solve the issue of the papacy. You go look at the objective historical facts. But he doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to listen to what he thinks is the root, which is pride. Which, yes, of course, pride and pride is the root of every sin, as Augustine says, and it's also the root of heresy and it's the root of schism. But just to say that is just presupposing that your position is correct, right? Maybe you're the ones that's in pride. Maybe your ecumenical research at the Ukrainian Catholic University in aid of NATO and whatnot, maybe that was a source of pride. Maybe your thought that you are going to solve the schism in your research to be a ministry of reconciliation, as you said, maybe that's pride.
Yeah, it's terrible. So it says that we are unable to forgive. Actually, no, it's fine. We can forgive almost everything, but we can't just come into communion with heresy, because union is great, but you can only be united in truth.
Right.
You can't be united
exactly.
in lies. Like by this metric, the Romans, the pagan Romans, when they persecuted Christians, they wanted to be united with them. They persecuted them not because they worshipped Christ, but because they worshipped Christ only. They wanted to be united with all this array of dogma. It was called the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. So it was a union. So by this metric, do you think your martyrs that were martyred by Rome, who preferred truth instead of union, were they prideful? Christ himself teaches that there will be schism.
Right.
Christ says that he brings a sword. I'm not saying that we should look forward to schism, but just conflating any sort of split with being necessarily bad or prideful is very wrong. Because and as the same way, conflating any action of unity as being necessarily good. You see, political unity is also a tool of the Antichrist.
Yeah, that's a great point that we're going to get to. So, but this is the kind of reasoning that leads directly to Pachamama, right? Unity at the expense of truth. And by the way, all the reunion attempts, the reunionists, that was always their driving modus operandi. I'm just reminded of the excellent book by Papadakis, Crisis in Byzantium, which deals with the Synod of Blachernae. And it covers the fact that right after the Council of Lyons, which confirmed the Filioque, the East met and had Blachernae, which condemned the Filioque, which, by the way, is binding and normative for Orthodox. And we'll get to why that's binding and normative for Orthodox, because they actually touched on that in the stream. But you see the same designs for motivations at the time of that reunion synod. You see the same problems at the attempts at Florence's reunion. And the problem is that it's great to have the desire for unity, but again, it can't come at the expense of truth. And the problem with ecumenism, and we know that that's the motivation of Flanders, is 100% totally ecumenist. And he even admits this. He says back when he was received in, I was ecumenist back then. He was always an ecumenist. That's the problem. That's the root here, is that the assumption that I'm going to solve these problems because my heart and my motives are right, and I'm going to be I can help with this, I can heal that is pride, right? That is pride, assuming that you don't know, assuming that you know better than all these people who actually dealt with this problem for centuries, right? That's the pride here. It's not saying any position that's not your position is pride, right? So Isaac the Syrian, by the way, wasn't a Nestorian. At that time, the church of the East that he was a part of was actually in union with the Orthodox, and he does not teach a Nestorian ecclesiology or Christology. So Marshall, again, has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to the East. But I knew this about Marshall 10 years ago when we would debate the essence synergy distinction. He was totally lost, and he's still totally lost. He doesn't know why it's an issue. He doesn't get why it even matters. And the exact same is true of Flanders. I've never seen a person who goes from Orthodoxy to Rome who knew or grasped why the essence synergy distinction mattered. They couldn't tell you exactly what it is. They could say, well, it's like there's a distinction between God's actions and essence or whatever, but like, man, we're all just saying the same thing. No, we're not. And the Synod of Blachernae shows that the Orthodox Church knew that and has always known that. It's in our liturgy that we accept the essence synergy distinction. St. Gregory Palamas has entire debates, right? The debate with Barlaam over this issue. And so it doesn't matter how many ecumenists say that we can mesh these positions when the people who expounded these positions thought that and said very clearly that they couldn't be meshed. And all I have to do to prove the Roman Catholic wrong on this is to point out that for centuries they rejected Palamas and now they accept him. That shows you that your church is false. It's not based on truth. It's just based on power temporal power and being under the Pope. You can have as many faiths as you want as long as you accept Peter in their sense, right? As long as you accept, and by the way, when I say Peter, they want Peter to be the head of all the world religions. That's where this is going. And by the way, you think that's crazy. No, Flanders loves Soloviev. That's what Soloviev wanted. Peter as a head of world religions.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to make a side note on history because it brings up some things that often comes up. Is that we're prideful because we remember the Fourth Crusade, which is the sack and destruction of Constantinople by a Crusader army, which was excommunicated by the Pope for attacking other Catholic cities. But this whole crusade thing started because they mistook just war with holy war. Holy war is a Muslim concept. You don't get salvation by going to war. Killing someone is always bad. You can be part of a just war, but if you kill someone, you can become a priest. If you have blood on your hands, you can go behind the altar. And even Saint Basil, he says that yes, we can accept that you go to war, but under some circumstances, if the war is just, it cannot be a war for persecution. It needs to be to defend Christians. So it's it doesn't cleanse your sins, and we're gonna see that Rome itself today shows that the crusade were not to defend Christians, because Jerusalem has been under Muslim rule for quite a while at the time of the First Crusade. But the First Crusade, the crusade thing only kicks off when there's a schism. So he says, we are unable to forgive this. No, we can forgive you. We can forgive, but what we cannot do is forget our martyrs. If you read Revelations, it's the martyr, the blood of the martyrs. Christ is heaven, and Christ will avenge them. So no, we just keep to tradition. What we don't forget is what happened also after the Fourth Crusade, because during the Latin empires, there's been many persecutions of Orthodox Christians. Just after the Crusades, we also have crusades starting in Russia. So it's not only against Byzantium; it's against Russia. That for example, Saint Alexander Nevsky, he fought something that happened. He fought an army of Teutonic Crusaders, and these Teutonic Crusaders have been evangelizing the Baltic for quite a while, but they never attacked before the Fourth Crusade. So actually, you after the Fourth Crusade, you just said that we have fair game. We also criticize the Uniates. We have many martyrs against the Uniates. We have even Uniate Byzantine emperors were in communion with Rome that persecuted and killed people. We have the Polish yoke over the Ukrainians, and of course we cannot forget our martyrs, and they were killed specifically for these reasons. Usually people counteract by saying there's been the massacre of the Latins in the Byzantine Empire. If you look at it, it was not done by the church. Why did it happen? It happened because you had Venetians and Genoans competing, and they would attack each other's suburbs. And actually, at some point, the emperor said, "Okay, I have authority in my empire. You had trading rights, and you started attacking each other in my empire. I'm liquidating a part of the Venetian charter." The church doesn't have much to do with it.
Oh, that's by the way, yeah. He has speaking of, he has a blog post where he touched on some of that, and that's one of the blog posts where he says, "Don't worry about getting into this historical thing of back and forth on the papacy, because you'll get into the question of forged documents supporting the papacy, and we can't really know if those are forged or not. Nobody even really knows. Do we even really know if those are forged or not? Actually, your own Vatican admits that those are forgeries. What are you talking about? All of these key texts that prove the temporal power of the papacy, everything from donation of Constantine, the Galatian decretals, Suso-Isidorian decretals, right, the Samachian forgeries, right? These all played into not just backing up the Petrine succession of infallibility for Rome, supposedly, but also in terms of Rome's temporal power, which, again, obviously evolves into being what it is nowadays, the papal states, the Vatican Bank, a secular institution, something that Metropolitan Seraphim of Piraeus calls out very quickly in his article, that it's largely about papal Cicero power, which is ironic given their claims and critiques of Cicero papism.
Yeah. I just finished on the martyr. So yes, they call spiteful for murderers and martyrs, which is ironic because they themselves have no problem forgetting their own martyrs. And if you look at Vatican II, the calendar reform actually removed many saints from the calendar, some of which are martyrs, and even before you had saints being phased out.
Yeah, they can remove saints from the calendar. Clement of Alexandria, Simon of Trent. I mean, they can just move. It's like, how is that universal ordinary magisterial? If canonizations are universal ordinary magisterium, which obviously they are, and then you can remove the saints, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's bogus because these people entered the church the orthodox way through tradition, and today they will tell you actually the instance the paperwork about saints it's not like this. There's no formal canonization of Saint Augustine and stuff like this, but apparently they can be removed this way, and at some point there's been some backlash because at some point they removed Catherine of Alexandria, they removed Saint George, and they later added them back, but oftentimes in order to they will remove saints and later cover up by saying, oh, don't worry, they're in the other calendar, it's fine. They removed Saint Cyril of Alexandria. So they say that they are apparently the church that have the authority of the Council of Ephesus, but they will remove Saint Cyril of Alexandria because he put some he cast some shade on on the Pope. So yes, also this proves that the Orthodox way of making saints enter the church is part of the divino-human magisterium of all church. Like all church is a divino-human entity.
So well, yeah, I mean, for the first millennium, it was a local phenomenon, and it still is in Orthodoxy. Nobody will admit that the Roman Catholic Pope in the first millennium is who confirmed all saints. Everybody knows that's a post-schism development in the Latin Church because it's an innovation, because obviously it didn't work that way before. The Pope didn't decide through the Roman See every single saint for the Church. Now, after the schism, they do, because it's an obvious innovation. So we are the traditional church, you're not.
Yeah, so they will say it's messy and stuff like this. No, it's being recognized by tradition. The first step for sanctity is actually not waiting for the Pope to accept. It's to acknowledge a person as a saint. So, for example, today we have people who are making icons of Seraphim Rose. Why? Because this is the Orthodox way, and actually there's a good Baptist argument that actually works here. Is that the saints for us enter the church in this divino-human tradition. For Rome, it can be done and done. It's just about paperwork. So I can even argue that there is no sanctity in sainthood in Rome because they adopted this new thing. It's just about paperwork. Tomorrow you can be canonized. Next day you can be uncanonized, depending on how bad it is. If it allows the papacy, for example, Saint Simon of Trent was removed from the calendar because of the circumstances.
Yeah, he's not ecumenically viable given the history of post-Vatican II Roman Catholicism. He's not ecumenically viable, so they had to get rid of him. By the way, the next point in their talk was he attempted to try to comment on the Metropolitan Moscow Patriarchate and the dispute with the EP and the problem in the Ukraine. Now, this is interesting again because he is from the university, the Catholic University in the Ukraine. So I think that, and we know that that's connected to the people at Fordham. We know that the ecumenists there have been working with the Roman Catholics and the Uniates to undermine the influence of the Russian Orthodox Church there and the canonical Ukrainian Church, Metropolitan Onufry. That's all being done and fostered by NATO and the CIA. What's very interesting that they never even touched on this. And it's well known in mainstream news. It's well known if you go to orthochristian.com, countless articles describing and detailing the problems in Ukraine. No mention of any of that. No mention of the problems of how ecumenists are a big part of this, right? I thought Taylor Marshall is not a big fan of ecumenism. Oh, but if it's to undermine the Orthodox Church there, suddenly ecumenism is good, right? So, but that just goes along with their, ends justify the means Catholic moral system that we get from Alphonsus Liguori. But he talks about the rivalry. He says that this is crazy, that one patriarch will be out of communion with another. This is just crazy. Has he never read church history? Does he not know of the countless examples of this happening in the first millennium? And the Pope didn't just solve all these problems, right? He acts like this is something that's like just unique to like 20th century Orthodoxy or 19th century Orthodoxy. This has happened in all kinds of times in the first millennium. In fact, what's the situation with the Synod of Oak, where Cyril of Alexandria, isn't he out of communion with Chrysostom and Rome? Right. So like there's a period where they're out of communion. St. John Chrysostom, for a long time in his life, was out of communion with Rome, right? So there's plenty of examples. The Canon 28 of Chalcedon talks about the very thing that he doesn't even grasp, right? The very thing that he says acts like as some normative thing is right in the middle of the Council of Chalcedon.
Yeah. He says that, and I quote him, at 19 minutes, this makes no sense. The fact that you have, indirect communion. Look at church history. At 17 minutes, they say that rivalry between the patriarchates are showing that there's a problem. All the councils, to an extent, you got rivalries between patriarchate, and they're so bad at this. They don't even acknowledge it. They say that they acknowledge the African schism with Saint Cyprian of Carthage actually disagreeing with the Pope. It's happened during all this part where Rome was trying to show that it had leadership over northern Africa's Maghreb region, Carthage region, and they say, oh, but don't worry. When we think about it, it's just an exception. It's right. Been going on. Like if you look at the church always had problems. Even Saint John Chrysostom says that hell is paved with the skulls of bishops. Right. The church always had problems. The church always had these issues. But when we look at the kind of issues that both sides are facing, we have the same issues as the church of the first millennium. Right. We have the same ones. Like we have people disagreeing, and what's great is that the disagreement right now. It's not about faith. We do not want to add things to the creed. It's mostly about jurisdiction. It's a political squabble. So right. Actually, the fact that we disunited politically, because church did not come to make an empire. It said that down with Caesar. Right. You give to Caesar what is Caesar's. So the fact that we're not united politically, the fact that we're in competition, just like the patriarchates, that we're inside the same empire. It shows that we need to be able to keep the theology the best, whereas they are united politically, and it means that you just need to corrupt one person to destroy everything. So the problem you're having are just as innovative as your dogma. The problem in the Roman Church are just as innovative as the Roman dogma, and now you can just destroy everything with just one man.
Yeah, I mean, is it not obvious from Nicaea that the structure of the church involved patriarchates and national bishops? Does that mean that we are confined and limited to some sort of strict nationalism? No. But I mean, it's like these guys they've never even read the canons of the councils. Like they didn't even know the way that the councils operated. They have no idea the fact that this was the normative structure was honor being given in these councils. And there's no comparison between the honor of the Bishop of Rome, nor does a council determine the Bishop of Rome's local jurisdiction, nor can it be compared to Alexandria or to Antioch, right? But what do you see here in this famous canon of Nicaea, right? Have these people even looked at Nicaea? Do they even know? No, because all they do when they go to the church fathers just exist to be quote mined for papal supremacy presuppositions. That's the only reason that's all they care about. They don't ever debate the theology. They don't ever talk about the essence energy distinction. They won't talk about any of that stuff because all they care about is proving sola papum. That's the only thing. And again, Dullinger was correct when he said that after Vatican I, all of the Catholic apologetics will be papal lawyering. It will be just nothing but trying to prove that the papacy in Vatican I was always the case, when clearly the modus operandi in many, many, many examples, here you can see. I mean, if we were to say something like Canon 6, they would be like, oh, you're national churches, bro. You got a bunch of nationalism, bro. You don't have, you got your pentarchy, bro. You got your patriarchs, bro. The patriarchal system is out of the canons of the councils. Do you not understand that? like this is the modus operandi.
Yeah, it's very funny because he says that we are not the Church of the Seventh Council. We do not have the authority of the Seventh Council, but we keep the canons of them.
Right, you
Do you?
don't.
Like, yeah, and something that's very funny. Like, is this canon 6? You will have some people who try to turn the thing and say that actually it means that Alexandria is under Rome. No, it says and it says that very clearly in this canon that Rome has extended jurisdiction not because of Petrine supremacy, but because of tradition.
Custom.
We
It
recognize
says custom.
tradition.
There's no mention of of that. Look at
He actually goes on against the that's just great. It goes on against the Pentarchy by saying that it's not it was developed. Yeah, it's part of tradition again.
correct. It developed in the councils, Goofus.
Yes, and he said, and in order to bring this argument, he brings up the Council of Constantinople I, which is this council is the best argument against the papacy.
Yes,
Even when
bring this up. Why is Constantinople I such a great argument against the papacy?
Yeah, so Constantinople I, so he brings it up because it is a council that establishes Constantinople as being a patriarchate before it was not patriarchate,
right.
Which is fine. We agree with this. Even today, the EP gets a Tomos from the Patriarch of Heraclion,
right?
In recognition of that. But you know full well that they adhere, especially the tribes, especially Marshall, to the idea of no salvation outside the church. But this council, and papal supremacy over councils, but was just great. And I have the canon of the Catholic Church that says that the Roman Pontiff, Canon 3038, the Roman Pontiff alone has to convoke an ecumenical council, preside over it. Second part, it is to the Roman Pontiff to determine the matter to be treated in a council and establish order in the ops of councils. So not only the Pope was not present any of the 7 ecumenical council, the first ones, but actually this council was convened in schism with Rome, because this council actually happens during the controversy of Lucifer of Cagliari. Mm-hmm. So Lucifer Cagliari, who was a schismatic, refused rebaptism of people that were persecuted under Diocletian. And this council is convened in schism with Rome because at the time there are 2 bishops of Antioch. There is Meletius, and there is Paulinus, and Paulinus is not recognized by Jerusalem and Constantinople, whereas Meletius is recognized by Jerusalem and Constantinople, and Paulinus is recognized by Rome and Alexandria. So this council is convened by the part that is supporting Meletius, By the way, Basil supported Meletius.
Right, yeah, Basil. This will come into play when I will read from Basil's letters, which are completely contrary to Vatican I papal supremacy. We'll see that was nowhere in Basil's mind. There's no way he could write the letters he wrote if he believed the Vatican I view, which, again, they have this curious thing where, on the one hand, they are constantly interested in proving the Vatican I mindset from the first millennium of Christianity. And then they turn around and will say and admit that there was no Vatican I mindset. It's a doctrine that evolved, and it's something that came to clearer and clearer evolutionary truth over time. Now, wait a minute, which is it? Is it something that was always there, which they try to argue when they go to Clement or to Pope Victor or to Leo or these people that they misuse? Or is it something that wasn't really clear but evolved? So they do both things at once.
Yeah, and so makes us great about Constantinople is that it's convened in schism with Rome, and yet it is an ecumenical council. It promotes ecumenical truth. And what does an ecumenical council mean? Ecumenical means that it's in the empire, but what does a true council mean? One that we follow is one that shows the truth of faith, and this council showed the truth of faith. And that means the Holy Spirit seals the decision. That means it's infallible. The papal infallibility derives from this. Before it was only for a true ecumenical council. Now it just was a pope. But this means that the Holy Spirit operated at an in an ecumenical council
outside of the Pope,
outside of the communion with Rome. That means that Rome was on the wrong side of a schism, and even Meletius, who died during this council,
Yeah, I just want
died
to
out of
stress too,
commitment.
look at the quality of the content that Snek brings to this stream. Look at the quality of the content and depth that we go into and compare that to just the totally normie emotional appeal that they did, right? That's why he says, don't go into the actual claims, just go by the fact that I had a burning in my bosom at liturgy one day that told me that I was in pride, right? And then they go on to just list, well, and they've got some problems and they don't have the Pope. That's the essence of that whole thing. Look at where we're, I mean, they didn't even mention a single canon. They didn't even mention a single objection, right, of something like Canon 28. Now, Snek made a great point from Constantinople 1, but the next council after, well, there's Ephesus and then you have Chalcedon. The reason I'm bringing Chalcedon up is that if you look at Canon 28, which, by the way, yes, the papacy later rejected, and obviously they had to reject it because it doesn't fit with their paradigm, but we're bringing it forth because what this shows us is the canonical procedure of the church, the mindset of the church at that time to propose this canon, right? And again, yes, eventually the Bishop of Rome rejects this canon because he doesn't like what's in that canon, obviously. But what it shows is that
which is weird because like if the Pope is supposed to reign over all the council, why does he have to seek the canon promoted in the council that is
why is this canon even there? Why is it even there? That's the point. The mindset of the council is conciliar. Canons are conciliar, right? Papal letters and dogmas are not, right? So canons are conciliar. And what does this canon say? It says that the tradition of the fathers is what derives, the patriarchate derives its honor and its rights from the tradition of the councils. We saw that with Canon 6 of Nicaea. And here in Canon 28 of Chalcedon, what you see is that the rights and privileges of the throne of old Rome were because it was the royal city, and so Constantinople should have equal rights and privileges because it's new Rome, right? And so it should be magnified as she is to the second in rank, and it should have all the same powers and prerogatives. Because of why? Magical Peter powers? No, because of because of the canons of the councils and because of custom. And so this custom, right, is what is the basis, and it's rejected by the Pope, obviously, right? So the papacy eventually has to. Do you think this is the only example? There are multiple examples. I've got a list right here of all of the canons in all the ecumenical synods. Yes, I have, and we're going to go through some of these, which show that each one of these canons that's proposed in every ecumenical synod, not all the canons, but each canon that we have as an example here, is contrary to the attitude of Vatican I. And again, notice the double-think schizophrenia of the Roman Catholic apologists, who on the one hand want to tell you that the Vatican I mindset was always there. It was always there, clear. And at the same time, well, it wasn't really there. It was evolving. It was just a seed form, right, in the Cardinal Newman notion of evolution of dogma. It was a seed form that was there, and it evolved all the way up until the time of Vatican I. And so the most important doctrine of the church, which is not in the creed, totally absent in John Damascus's exposition of the orthodox faith, right, which they accept as a doctrine of the church, totally absent, nothing there. It's the last thing that the Catholic Church defines in an ecumenical council except for Vatican I, right? So it took all the way up to the 1800s to define the doctrine that is the foundation of the church and how you know the true church, and it's not even in the creed. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Some things that's interesting is that during the Council of Constantinople, the first one, Meletius, who was presiding over it, died. And Meletius is a saint. So he was in schism with Rome. He died in schism with Rome, knowing about the schism because he was trying to mend it. And still, he is a saint. So not only there is, there is salvation outside of the Roman communion, but there is also sanctity, sainthood. And there's also ecumenical councils. And that's something, they will say that, this council is only ecumenical, Constantinople I is only ecumenical because the Pope accepted it. Yes, but it doesn't matter according to your ecclesiology, because It means that a real ecumenical council with the Spirit falling on it happened outside of your church. Today, will Marshall accept, an ecumenical council if it was convened by, Pope Michael? Pope Michael is in communion with the church. He has the same theology as Marshall, so he's not heretical according to him. If I don't know, Francis, if Pope Michael makes an ecumenical council and Francis accepted it, will Marshall agree?
Right. Yeah, that's a good
Will you
point.
agree to this? No, you won't. It's exactly what happened in the past. Of course, there were not there was not the trailer park aspect, but still in schism with Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible since they bring that up. And again, really, we don't have the potency of the councils. But why don't you follow the canons? Like Canon 28 is also great. We got so
Well,
many
the canons show us the mindset of the church, and it shows that they are innovators and that they don't follow the canons. Now, we're not pointing the canons out like some sort of legalistic Talmudic thing, like, oh, you just have to follow it because it was an ancient canon. No. The point is that the canons show the mindset and the praxis of the church of that century universally. And none of these canons prove or back up the Roman Catholic view. It's something that evolves over time on the basis of canonical privileges. And we see the exact same thing with Bartholomew now. Bartholomew now is trying to do the very thing that the papacy did, which was to claim that all of these canonical privileges that were accorded to them, to the different patriarchates over time throughout the centuries in the canons, somehow now translates into a direct sort of voice of God modus operandi. But if you look, for example, at Canon 4 of Nicaea, let's see again how the Roman Catholic Church, after the first millennium, completely departed from the normative way of appointing bishops. Now, why would the Pope want to appoint all bishops? Well, obviously to make sure that they all agree on the papacy. But now, why, if that's the case, why didn't Nicaea have the wisdom and the foresight to understand that the Pope should appoint every bishop in the world, right? Who appoints bishops at the time of Nicaea? Canon 4, It is by all means proper that a bishop should be appointed by all the bishops in the province. It's not just the Pope. And after the Renaissance, it becomes normative for the Pope to sign off on all of the bishops in the world, right? So again, at a basic, fundamental level, they're completely ignorant of history, right?
Yeah, we've cited the canons, the current canons of the Catholic Church. They basically contradict these canons.
Yeah.
Something that's interesting is that even says that there's a need for the Nicene Creed, but why is it not present in the Nicene Creed? If that's the things that ultimately matters, if salvation is ultimately directly linked, and mostly linked to the fact to be in communion with Rome, why isn't it in this creed? At 10 minutes, it says there is a need for the Nicene Creed. The creed talks about the church in terms of ontology. They talk about the church ontologically. If the church is built on Peter and not on
I mean, your salvation hinges on this. Unum Sanctum says your salvation hinges on being in union with the Pope. Not only Unum Sanctum, Cantate Domino teaches that there's no salvation or martyrdom. There are no martyrs outside of the Catholic Church, right? Denzinger, let's get out our friendly Denzinger. By the way, it's not Cantate Domino that first says this. Cantate Domino is referring to an older statement in Denzinger, Pope Pelagius II, 247, which says that there's no martyrs outside of the Catholic Church, right? We would agree with that. There's no martyrs in other churches, right? That's true. We're not ecumenists. However, after Unum Sanctum, this becomes there's no martyrs outside of communion with the Bishop of Rome himself. That's why Cantate Domino expands that. And it says, no, so Unum Sanctum has happened, right? Cantate Domino happens at Florence, and it says that you have to not only be in union in the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Catholic Church, now you also have to have the requirement of being in union with the successor to Peter to be saved. So this is a salvific issue, right? Why is this absent in so many church fathers, so many doctors of the church, so many statements of the creed, so many places in the councils? This fundamental salvific doctrine is completely absent until magically, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, after the schism. Now you have to be in union with Rome to be saved. And by the way, they don't even teach that anymore. After Vatican II, you can literally, through some generic invincible ignorance desire, be saved in anything.
Yeah, like really, if you think that Vatican II changed the church, you should look at the early church and its history, because the Roman Catholic Church was in constant mutation, which apparently the Pope was supposed to prevent from. But Vatican I, if you look at the historians, if you look at Roman Catholic historians at the time, Goethe was a Roman Catholic historian. Dullinger was a Roman Catholic historian. So they've been teaching this. They was top of the class, and they said, this is creating a new religion. and even before that, like we said, like, papalism is creating a new religion.
Yeah.
It's been in constant mutation. It didn't start with Vatican II. Ecumenism didn't start with Vatican II. You already have multiple rites, multiple creeds, multiple disciplines, starting at Florence. So yeah,
there was a specific terrible quote that Flanders has. I'm trying to figure out, find in my notes where he said something like, "We're frozen in 787, and we don't even have the faith of the ecumenical councils." He says something like this. Like, I'm trying to see where I wrote down his exact phraseology. He says there's you just become your own. He says you become your own.
He says we don't have the faith, but like it doesn't even have the creed.
And we don't have the faith. Yeah. We don't have the faith of those 7 councils. Now, let's go through each of the 7 councils. Again, thank you to Kai and Seraphim from the Discord, shout out. So in Nicaea, so if you want to write these down, you can go and look these up. I'm not going to screenshot every one of these. We'd be here all night, but I'm going to list them. So in Nicaea, Canon 4, as we showed Canon 6. In Constantinople 1, Canon 2 discusses the fact that bishops stay within their jurisdictions. This leads to confusion if they go outside of their jurisdictions. There's no mention of the exemption of Rome here, so they make an argument of silence. Oh, well, it's just understood. But remember, Constantinople was convened in schism, right? And later is accepted by Rome. So no mention of that, but yet the Holy Spirit is guiding this council. It's ridiculous. Canon 3, the Bishop of Constantinople should have prerogatives, as Snek mentioned. So we begin to have the prerogatives of honor given to Constantinople like Rome. In Canon 6 of Ephesus, we have the Holy Synod, which is accepted by the church as ecumenical, has authority over all the faithful. No mention of the Roman bishop having the real authority or the true authority or the principal foundational authority over all the faithful. The canon specifically says the ecumenical council is what has authority over all the faithful. Canon 7 is the statement on not altering the creed. Canon 8 is contrary to the canons of the apostolic constitutions of the holy apostles. The transgressions of the ancient customs and the canons of the blessed fathers are to be kept. And there's no mention of any special authority of Rome in this canon. The canon reaffirms the importance of the succession of the bishops in their own jurisdiction and explicitly condemns taking over other jurisdiction. There's no special authority or exemption mentioned for Rome in Canon 8, which would have been the ideal place to mention it, right? Canon 1 of Chalcedon states that the ancient canons remain in force. Now remember, every time that these canons state that an ancient canon remains in force, it's presupposing that modus operandi, right? It's not saying that it's not allowing a new mode of doing these things. Well, now we did that with the canons. Now the Pope can come in and sort of arbitrarily decide what he wants and what he doesn't want. Again, the whole praxis, modus operandi of canons itself is synodal. It's collegial. These don't make any sense in the Vatican I mindset. And that's why the Roman Catholic Church has a completely different praxis after the first millennium. So what we're trying to demonstrate here is that his claim that we don't have the faith of the 7 councils is ludicrous. And he hasn't even read these canons. Or if he has, he's being dishonest because he should have dealt with them. He should have said, well, let's deal with some of their objections from these ancient canons. So the ancient canons are in force. There's no mention in those ancient canons of Rome having the universal supremacy. It would have obviously been attached at every point. I mean, look, none of the people at this time operate like the Roman Catholic apologists now. Where are all the Roman Catholic apologists at this time in these councils? They should have just been citing the popes all the time. But they don't do that. Where is that mindset? It's not here, right? And they do the flip-flop. Well, it wasn't there because it was nascent in seed form. But no, wait a minute. You just tried to argue from all these post-apostolic fathers, Victor, Clement, that it was always there. Total contradictions. So Canon 1 of Chalcedon is the ancient canons are in force. Canon 5 says that all the boundaries of the ancient canons remain in force. No exemptions for Rome mentioned. Canon 9, appeal your problems in your local jurisdictions up the hierarchy until they reach the throne of Constantinople. You hear that? This is Chalcedon. You can appeal up the structure until it reaches Constantinople. Where is the mention of the final infallible throne of Rome? Now, when the Roman Catholic apologists are presented with this, you know what they actually say? They say, well, it was just understood. In every one of these examples, they always say, appeal to silence. It's all there. It's just no actual, it's just appeal to silence. Well, they all knew that.
Even if you go look in Roman Catholic sources, for example, before Vatican I, they had a Roman Catholic historian compile all the history of the councils. This guy was named FLA, and FLA compiles the history of the council, and he says, okay, he was blackmailed to an extent, and of course he got a Roman Catholic bias, but if you look at it, it still doesn't match the Roman Catholic understanding. When it comes to Constantinople I, he says that yes, they were not in communion with the Pope. He says that the only other example they have is of a previous Roman Catholic historian who actually quoted false acts of council. He says that Baronius here, Cardinal Baronius, which is a beatified in the Roman Church, he is quoting false stuff, and Baronius was a notorious forger. It's Baronius also that pushed the Pope to remove Cyril of Alexandria from the list of the saints, because he saw a problem with papalism in Ephesus, because of Cyril of Alexandria. So yeah, you can even go look at your own sources. They will show this at some point. If even goes on, he was blackmailed, but he still says that Honorius was a heretic. It's still like, go read your own sources. It debunks the church.
Yeah. So Canon 10, traditional jurisdictional boundaries enforced, no exemptions for Rome. Canon 12, we're still doing Chalcedon. Canon 12, no bishop is allowed to set up two metropolitans in one province. Any bishop who does loses his rank. There's no exemptions for the Roman bishop here. Again, limited jurisdictions. And by the way, don't they have 3 patriarchs of Antioch, you said?
They actually bring at 35 minutes. You have overlapping jurisdiction. No, it's not really overlapping jurisdiction because it was a Roman jurisdiction that is now void, and these are diasporas. However, yes, you have currently you have 3 Roman Catholic bishops all in communion with the Pope in the same city, professing different creed, different faith, different saints.
Yeah. Canon 19 says each bishop or metropolitan is in charge of their own jurisdiction and the matters of their own area. This would have been a great place to mention the obvious exemption of the Bishop of Rome. It's never mentioned. Canon 25, and again, Canon 28 of Nicaea is contrary to the Roman Catholic scheme, right? It says Constantinople is equal to Rome in all the privileges, and it's number 2 because Rome is ancient, and it's doubly apostolic from Peter and Paul, and by tradition and custom, right? So, in other words, Canon 28. Canon 28 shows that they were not assuming papal supremacy by silence. That's the key here. So all of these other canons are shown to be interpreted in the sense that we mean it because they included Canon 28 in here, which is against the papal view. So you can't argue that all these canons presuppose the papal view when Canon 28 shows that they did not. So Canon 19, go ahead.
Canon 28 is great because it also shows that Rome honors by being doubly apostolic. Like a lot of times, a lot of people forget that Paul actually came first, according to Scripture. Right. Paul came first to Rome, and this seat was doubly apostolic. And even if you look at early history, and I think that you've got Ignatius of Antioch, you've got famous church historian Eusebius of Caesarea, who even states that this is the second pope. I forgot his name.
Linus Cletus Clement, doesn't it go like that?
So Linus, was actually named by Paul. So you have a pope, which is supposed to be the office of Petrine line, which is in Pauline succession, and apparently still held the charisma of Peter, which is again ridiculous. And of course, this canon says that Rome is first, but they are equal. That means here clearly.
And what that shows is that the fact that Canon 28 is contrary to papalism and the papacy rejects it shows that the rest of these canons cannot be presupposed to be Roman supremacy. That's the point. Canon 25 says the election of bishops is by the metropolitan, not the Bishop of Rome. Again, the post first millennium, the second millennium of Roman Catholicism, the Pope approves all bishops.
Yeah, and they even bring that up. They even shoot themselves in the foot because they talk about the investiture crisis, which was about the Pope not electing bishops. And yes, because that's something that happened, and this crisis happened just right after schism. Why?
Yeah, exactly.
Because
right. So let's move to Trello.
Bringing up this stuff to destroy their own arguments throughout the stream. It's just
their whole stream was nothing but like things that undermine themselves. The pot calling the kettle black. Now Trello is of course the synod that we accept as ecumenical because it's eventually accepted at Nicaea II. All right. So now the Roman Catholics have had a change in their position right after Nicaea II. The Western Church accepted it, and then soon after, I don't remember off the top of my head which pope it was, but one of the popes after Nicaea II, I read a Jesuits, and not a crazy Jesuit, but a scholarly book on this a long time ago about how there was initially the acceptance of the canons of Trello, and then later, particularly in relationship to married clergy, the Pope obviously later rescinded that because Trello includes the famous canon on married priests. But for a time, the Pope had accepted the Trello canons, which because they're part of Nicaea too, right? So when we look at Trello, and by the way, for us, for Orthodox, Trello is normative, right? It's ecumenical. The first canon, of course, talks about the heretics that are condemned, and Honorius is included in the heresiology as a condemned heretic. And they were condemned by the unanimous acknowledgement of the faithful. That was revealed to the church. They were synodically anathematized, universally considered to be anathematized, and that includes the Bishop of Rome here. So they had no problem with the council condemning the Pope, and for a time the Pope accepted the canons of Trello. Canon 2 of Trello says that it reaffirms the previous canons and understandings of the canons, and that they remain in force. There's no mention of any new foundation or Rome superseding or being the overriding foundation. And again, Trello shows that they understood the canons in our perspective because the Pope later rejects aspects of these canons in Trello. Anything to say on that, Snek?
No. Trello is really great. Also, Trello is interesting because it shows that what has become a mandatory celibacy in Rome evolved, and originally so was condemned by council. Mandatory celibacy was condemned by council.
Right. So Canon 8, explicitly permits men to be married before becoming ordained. This was the norm throughout the church. Now, it's a discipline that became normative in the Latin church, but it was normative throughout the entire church back to the time of the apostles. So it's just ludicrous to introduce an innovation to make it mandated when the entire church at this time accepted it as normative. It's a proof of innovation.
Yeah. By the way, we'll talk about this. It also mentions, that they start to engage in practices that resemble divorce. But we're going to make a whole part, I believe, in divorce and think we're going to.
And by the way, I'm gonna I should cite the Ubi article. I know you guys are going to do a longer treatise on this, but they did bring up the divorce issue.
I think we could develop it later. There's other things.
Yeah, they did bring it up. But just for the sake of people in the chat, because this always comes up, here is a patristic florigelium from Ubi Petrus, citing church fathers on this matter. And by the way, the canon. This is another point that I've noticed. The canons of Saint Basil, which allow for divorce and remarriage, were part of the Eastern Roman Catholic Church. So by their own admission, since the East admitted this and allowed this, the Pope admitted and allowed this because there was one church allowing this for the first millennium. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, if it was wrong, why didn't the Pope correct us? I thought he was here to correct things like this.
Yeah.
Why didn't he?
Okay, so Canon 21, I'll just real quickly go through the rest of these canons. Canon 21 of Trello, Canon 25, Canon 32, Canon 36, Canon 55, Canon 82, Canon 90, all pose problems for the Vatican I understanding, being the case and true in the first millennium. When we come to Nicaea 2, I'm going to list the canons: Canon 1, Canon 3, Canon 10, Canon 11. Those are problematic. And then there are multiple apostolic canons, which we still hold as normative, which these councils approve and perpetuate the apostolic canons. That's the thing, is that the apostolic canons are perpetuated and approved. And Canon 1, 5, 15, 33, 34, 35, 39, 45, 64, 74, 81, all are contrary to papal supremacy. Now, in their church, in their mind, they don't care. You can throw all of that in the trash. It doesn't matter, because after 1980, well, after the first millennium, the Pope is basically the arbiter of canon law too, right? Everything switches to Rome. Now, again, notice how canon law in the first millennium is synodal. After the schism, it's all papal. Who changed the canon? So in 1917, they had the trad canon law, which, by the way, the trads all followed the 1917 code. And then in 1983, John Paul updates the canon law to have a updated canon law, which, by the way, allows things like communing with heretics and schismatics in extreme cases, or perhaps not in extreme cases even. So a lot of the trads, if you're in Seda world, if you're a Sedevacantists, you know this. You know that you will appeal to the 1917 code because there's a change in getting sacraments from heretics and schismatics, which Flanders has to correct Marshall on. Marshall's like, I wouldn't do it. And then he's like, well, actually you can, according to canon law. So even between them, they don't even know what the Roman Catholic position is. By the way, wasn't the Pope supposed to solve these problems of where do I get communion, where do I not? Oh, there's all these problems. Oh, communion. We don't know who's in communion with who. You don't even know if you could go receive communion from a heretic or not. Marshall thinks you can't. Dude thinks you can. Who knows whether you can or can't in the Roman Catholic world, because the 1917 code, right, it was very limited in the extreme cases. After ecumenism in the 1983 code, oh, it's just do whatever you want, bro. Pretty much, right? Pretty much.
Yeah. I just want to stress again that, of course, all the thing we're saying, brings the, orthodox position. There's another layer of problem for Rome, because, of course, the unions accept it. For example, the unions accept the apostolic,
Great point.
constitution. If Rome, in order to say that the apostolic constitution are not valid, they will use atheistic argument. From atheist scholars say, it's actually quite a late text. The latest paper found is quite it's tradition. If I start using sort of arguments, you can't even use your Bible, but you are saying that you have the Bible because of tradition. So here another layer of dishonesty, another layer of contradiction in Rome.
Yeah, so he says we have so I'm going to move on. We have a fantasy of union. There's no real unity in Orthodoxy because of the metropolitan, one metropolitan being out of union with another. Well, then that would apply to your own church in the first millennium because of the many instances where one metropolitan or bishop was out of union with another, and it's later resolved by councils. So by your own standard, the Roman Catholic Church for the first millennium had a false fantasy of union. But in fact, the Orthodox Church is united. We have one creed, we have one faith, we have the same canons that we follow, and we have a canonical jurisdiction throughout the world, and we have a single Eucharist that we participate, and we still fence the table from. The Roman Catholic Church no longer fences the table. You can go to the Vatican. I have countless friends who are atheists, and they go to the Vatican, they walk up and get communion. Now, there may be abuses of canons in the Orthodox Church, but typically speaking, you don't do that. Like, you can't just walk up there, oh, bro, I'm off the street, bro. Give me that wafer, dog. Ha, ha, ha. Look, you gotta check it out, bro. I got a wafer. I have friends that did that. They're like, bro, I brought back my wafer from the Vatican, bro.
Yeah, I think they even have like Eucharist servant. I don't know how they call it, but they have Eucharistic minister, and they can be women.
Yeah, they have women and they have kids up on the altar, all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. So let's see. So the accusation that there's a fantasy of union totally is undermined in the fact that they can't decide if Vatican II is true or not. Photius and Gregory.
Melkite says there's 7 councils, so they say, oh, you can't even determine your own councils. Can you?
Yeah, right.
I think
right. What's Vatican II, by the way?
Is the exact example of it.
What's the Amazon Synod? What's the Amazon Synod? What's Vatican II? What are those? Right. Photius, Greg, and Greg.
Like Amazon Synod, they will say that, it's a final document in English is not published, so it's fine. And I've heard this, but Vatican II itself states that it is an ecumenical council. If you look at Lumen Gentium, it's like it's in the title, ecumenical council with solemn magisterium, dogmatic constitution.
And they misused the Paul VI quote. Paul VI did not say the council was not teaching authoritatively. He says that it defined no new dogmas. Yeah. So what? That doesn't mean it's not dogmatic. That's a total trad myth. I was in trad world. I know all the trad myths. I tried to use that one for a while when I went to the SSPX mass. Oh, bro, we don't have to believe Vatican. Oh, really? You don't have to believe Vatican II? Have you ever been to a Vatican II church? When the SSPX people, when they reconcile to the Vatican, do you know what they have to accept? Vatican II. You can't reconcile, would not accept Vatican II. All the FSSP were made to accept Vatican II when they were reconciled out of the SSPX. Any SSPX person that goes back to the normative diocesan union, you have to accept Vatican II. Any catechumen in the world who's brought into the Roman Catholic RCIA program is taught Vatican II. The Pope himself has reiterated that Vatican II's reforms are magisterial and irreversible. Francis has said this multiple times. I've quoted that.
Yeah, even because of Sordo, yeah. Something that's great is that they will say that Vatican II doesn't add any new dogma, but then they will proceed to reject Vatican II, which shows that something was added. So Marshall, by having this position, actually shows that there is something to be rejected, which means that there is something that, according to him, was added, was something new.
What do you mean it doesn't teach?
So yes.
It's hundreds of pages of dogmas. What are you talking about? Like it's not dogma. It's not dogmatic. Well, actually it is. So this is double talk. This is sophistry. And this is what happens when you get into the world of Roman Catholicism. This is what Tim is going to learn the hard way if he's a legitimate convert. He's going to learn this spiraling world of mental gymnastics and craziness to where, on the one hand, the documents of Vatican II are called the dogmatic constitution of the church. They're, by the way, let's put something to rest really quick here. What is required in the Roman Catholic system for something to be dogmatic? A lot of them are confused, and they think that it's, the Pope has to explicitly state that it's an infallible, extraordinary. No, it's not. The only thing that's required...
It's never been done like this. If you look at Pastor Artonis, it says, actually the requirements say, oh yeah, it's very high requirement.
No, it's not.
And everything he says is not exceptional per se, but the requirements are not so hard to reach. It needs to be a revelation of a new doctrine of faith and morals, which is already a huge spectrum. Lumen Gentium definitely covers faith. There's another dogmatic institution that covers a moral side. As well as faith, by the way.
Yeah, it's actually a condemned proposition, for example, that you only have to hold to the universal extraordinary magisterium. That's a condemned proposition. That's why Vatican II...
There's several points. So it needs to be said by a pope, which is not really hard, with legitimate magisterial authority, as a bishop.
So it's faith and it's a question of right. Is it faith and morals? Is it related to faith and morals? Is it from the See of Peter? And is it for the whole church? That's all that's required. Yeah. And it doesn't matter whether it can fall under either extraordinary or ordinary. If those three criteria are met, it can't be erroneous. So to call Vatican II, when it easily fits all three of those criterion, not dogmatic, is ridiculous. You have to follow Vatican II, and everybody knows you have to follow Vatican II. So they're just lying to themselves and saying, well, I'm going to reject the ecumenical. The Pope has enforced this, multiple popes, for 60 plus years. You can't reject 60 plus years of papal ordinary magisterial teaching.
Yeah, and something else that's great is that let's admit for the sake of argument that it's not an ecumenical council, it will still fall under ordinary magisterium, and ordinary magisterium has to be followed. Yep. And I'm quoting here, with a religious submission of the mind.
Docility.
And docility. And in Pastor Artonis, they say that if you go away from it, you go away from the truth of the Catholic Church. And you can lose faith and salvation because of it. Like you cannot go away from this without starting to lose faith and salvation. That's
why you have to submit to the
everybody. Everybody who doesn't like Pope Francis should just read Pastor Artonis. It's 5 pages long, probably less. Every sane Roman Catholics that have read this and knows that it is ecumenical and knows that it is infallible. I've seen many people apostatize because this is. Actually, this is not traditional at all. This is a very modernistic, a very not imperialist, but absolutist take. If you don't like Pope Francis, just read Pastor Antoninus, because this is the rules you have to follow. Actually, funnily enough,
just read all of Vatican I.
The fact that you have to follow his magisterium universality. This actually pushed secularism in the West quite a bit, because, of course, if you belong to another nation, you have this man, the Pope in Rome, the leader of another nation, that says that no, you have to follow you have to follow faith, morals, you have to follow decree, you have to follow all the ordinary magisterium. It means that the Pope can stage a revolution whenever he wants in your country. And today, to an extent, he's doing this. He's pushing for more migrants. He's saying, it's a question of moral.
Let me put this in the chat. Here is the full text of Vatican I, which hardly any of the trads have even read for the most part. Very few of them have actually read. It's only 10 pages. You ought to go read it, right? It's your most important. If the papacy is the most important doctrine, we can only be saved by the papacy, you would think that the Roman Catholics would all know by heart Vatican I. Of course, they haven't, but when you go read it, so there's the decrees. And by the way, don't just read, I'm not trying to rebuke you, Snek, but don't just read Pastor Turnus, because Pastor Turnus is only 2 sections of Vatican I. If you read all the sections there, and it's not that long, it's about 10 pages, you will see that everything that we're saying is absolutely correct. You have to follow the universal ordinary magisterium, and you have to accept all of his juridical decisions and decrees. This is condemned. The idea, trads, the idea that you can reject the holy office, the congregation of the doctrine of the faith, its decisions, any of the pontifical congregations and their decisions, any of the judgments and decrees that you can pick and choose, that is condemned in Denzinger 1683, 1792, 1698. All condemn that proposition, because that was the proposition that all the modernists were using to get around the papal statements at that time, you see. But here you have it. The trap that now binds you to Frank. You can't get around Frank.
Yeah. Something that's great is that they contradict this so many times during the stream. And I'm going to give an example of, Flanders, who says that he's absolutely not prideful, yet actually says that he's devoid of pride. Says he's devoid of pride, and that other people have different opinions than him because they have pride. He says it's like around 20, 30 times. We try to count. Something that's great, that he says that, actually the cure for pride is submitting to the Pope and not asking questions. And what does he do? If you look at his Twitter, he says that we should pray for the intercession of the co-redemptrix, even though the Pope made an official statement saying that the co-redemptrix is foolishness.
Wow, that's a great point.
So who's prideful here? Like, is it really an antidote to your pride? Because if you're not submitting to the Pope, then they say, no, actually we don't submit to the Pope. No, not like this. I mean, that's the ordinary magisterium. That's your own magisterium. So. Here, you're making no sense, contradicting yourself. The fact that Marshall does this is even worse, because he even wrote books. But, just technically submitted to the Pope, but not following his own magisterium and not following the Pope.
All right, so I've got most of the major points hit. I mean, let's get to their sort of crux. Now, I mean, you're free to bring in any more points you want to, but one of the things about economia that they bring up, I just want to point out the absurdity of the Roman. So they want to give all these emotional appeals. Allow me to do a little bit of a funny mock, because most of what I'm going to do right now is like the substance of their kind of approach. So let's take a look at pre-Vatican II moral theology. One of the most famous books, if you were in the SSPX or if you were a trad, you probably have Canon Ripley's book from 10. It's called This is the Faith. It's very popular. A lot of trads have read this book and refer to it. If you look at the section on page 191 about what constitutes a mortal sin on the Lord's Day, you have lists of activities. Okay, lists of activities that are servile work, and you have things like servile work would be plowing, sowing, harvesting, laundry, lawn mowing, cobbling, tailoring, printing, masonry, mines, and factory work. However, in some places there is the custom of justifying knitting and crocheting, but it's also permitted to go walking, riding, driving, rowing, and journeying, even though these works can be fatiguing. fatiguing. Literary and artistic works are lawful even if they're done for money. However, servile work is forbidden even though it's done as a form of recreation. For example, if you were to walk 2.5 or 3 hours for some kind of work and it was to become arduous, this would be mortal sin. So if on a Lord's Day, this is the most Talmudic, like crazy stuff ever in a normative Roman Catholic moral theology. This is why we don't have this problem, right? We don't have to swing from this insane autism of craziness level over to Vatican II clown mass. Notice the pendulum swing of the madness in Roman Catholicism, of the extreme of this this was written in 1951. 1950s, this is what your confessor would tell you in 1950. Oh, my child, did you walk 2 hours? My child, did you start sweating when you walked 2 hours? When you hit the 5th mile of the 2 hours of the walk, you lost all grace, son. You're entering the fires of hell. Once you hit the 5th mile, you're about to fall over into Dante's Inferno, my child. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's Talmudic, and again, it's Pharisaic, and this goes
totally,
against economy.
It's exactly what the Pharisees did. Yeah.
Yeah, if they followed that text, they would have been, at the time of Christ on the side of the Pharisees, saying, you cannot.
You can't pick grains on the Sabbath.
In front of the adulterous wife. You can have 2 stalls. That's the canon of Christ. Why is Jesus doing economy here?
Now, I cite one crazy example, but by the way, that actually characterizes the Latin trad mindset. Like if you're in the trad Seda world, you're characterized by that kind of obsessive, superstitious attitude, actually. And a lot of OCD, actually, a lot of people who are extremely excessive, compulsive disorder people. I met multiple SSPX priests, all of whom had actually to get counseling for their extreme OCD. So it's actually a feature of that religion. There's something else weird going on there. This idea of, just like if I sneeze during the mass, I'm damned. It's a mortal sin. The mass is not valid. Just crazy stuff like that. But it's an attitude of
this idea that everything needs to be tidy. They call the church a mess. No, actually, church is tradition. It evolved. It evolves this way. I'm not saying that it evolved in dogma or anything, but if you look at how the church is organized, it's been organized this way. And of course, economia is central to this, because at some point the application. The very application of the canon might actually go against the first idea of the canon. That's why it's brought up. That's why it's even in the Bible. That's why they want everything to be very, very tidy, very, very understandable. And you're just doing lawyering. If you look at early church, it's not about lawyering. People are making some level of concession, and here you like. I even saw a graph about salvation. The graph about salvation. It looked like a board game, like a flow chart.
It was a giant flow chart from like Final Fantasy with hit points and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah, it looks like an RPG, and you can get these kind of indulgences by praying at this time, turn this way in this church. This is not how it works. There's nothing mystical here. There's nothing. It's Talmudic praxis.
It's a weird obsession with a legalistic spirit. Exactly. And Vatican II is partly a reaction to that. That's what I'm trying to stress. Is that part of what's going on here is a reaction to that. So Taylor Marshall was mad about economia, and I think Francis is actually bringing economia into the church as an orthodox. It's a conspiracy. Francis is secretly orthodox, right? With his gravel voice. But what I'm trying to say is that we didn't have that problem because we understood that you can't have a one-size-fits-all answer to every single moral problem, and that was the problem of the Pharisees. So economia is the bishop making the decision. How do you think the church in the first millennium operated? Through the local bishop making the decision. You can't ask the Pope to solve all the problems in the ancient world. He's 1,000 miles away. How's he going to solve all the problems?
It's even in the canons. I think there's a canon in Nicaea that states that, now they have this pen and sheet, like, oh, you do this, you get this. It's like a menu. I think there's something, like even criticizes, you do what your priest does. Yeah, there's a canon about that. It says that penance needs, you need to understand that in penance, it needs to be in accordance to the penitent. That's why we need to
Right.
take
They will actually cite that in their proofs of how indulgences develop. They'll actually admit, they'll say, well, indulgences are because in the early church, if you would committed a serious sin and you were refraining from the table for 6 years, if the bishop gave you that long of a penance, he could also, if he saw that you were truly contrite, he could remove that temporal punishment of 6 years or whatever that was laid upon you from coming to the Eucharist. And so therefore, that's how they will argue this in their apologetic. That's how they will say, oh, see, now we have the ability to remove any kind of temporal punishment. And it just turns into this giant algorithm equation scheme, which is ludicrous and crazy.
But that's economia.
They're admitting economia.
So we have canons that teach economia in the early councils, and that tell you not to be a spurg about canonical law.
And by the way, all we have to do to refute that stupid argument is just appeal to the uniates once again, because the uniates will operate just like we do.
Yeah. So he uses this for rebaptism and chrismation here. We talk about this.
I do want to touch on that real quick, because he said that we don't see that in the councils. Really. So Canon 8 of Nicaea. What does Canon 8 of Nicaea do? Well, it has certain specifications based on the case for how to receive schismatic bishops back into the church. So it's not universal in all cases, in all situations, how even a bishop would be received from schism back into the Orthodox Church. And in this case, in Canon 8 of Nicaea, they can be received in a way that's different in other cases, right? Where's Canon 8 of Nicaea? I was going to read it. It reads that the schismatic novatianists can be received. I'm way off. It says, concerning those who call themselves Cathari, that's not the medieval Cathari. These are novatianists, right? And by the way, some trad this week said that I think Cathari might be Orthodox. No, I made a video that got 100,000 views saying the Cathari were stupid heretics. They were Gnostics in the Middle Ages. If these purists, these are the purists, the novatianists, if they came over to the Catholic Church and the Catholic Apostolic Church, this great and holy Synod of Nicaea decrees that they who are ordained should continue as they are in clergy. But if they, before all things necessary, that they should be professed in writing that they observe and follow the dogmas of our church, and that they will not commune persons who have been twice married. Commune with persons who are twice married. I think this is talking about digamy. And with those who have lapsed in persecution and have had a period of penance. So you could actually relax the period of penance.
Yeah, some things that's great also with the canons against the Cathari. So this were Gnostic sects. You've got the Council of Gangra, which is accepted ecumenical council, and that shows that you are anathema if you believe that receiving the Eucharist from the hand of a married priest it makes it dirty, and it's a great segue for the next part, because after bringing economia, of course they are talking about divorce and stuff like this. So to quote Marshall, he says that we are blushing when we talk about divorce. Really? Because it seems like there is a tradition here. It seems that so first of all, I'm going to cover everything that relates to the priesthood when it comes to divorce. So he says that, we're importing loose morality. Actually, no, if you look at, and Father Josiah Trenham has a great talk on Roman Catholicism that mentions this. If you look at Nicaea, it states that a priest cannot live with several women in his house, but that does not include his wife. And actually, there were talks about maybe restricting this, making celibacy mandatory at Nicaea. And it's actually a father of the desert who came forward and said that no, by doing this, you will set yourself to a higher standard than the apostles themselves. So we had part of traditions that even suggested that the apostle remains married, which actually was, is confirmed by some apocryphon which talks about divine apostle Peter preaching with his wife. He states that mandatory clerical celibacy fosters a greater missionary spirit,
Right.
which is ridiculous because we're going to talk about this later, because he goes on full. He makes really bad argument, like a prosperity gospel tier, but he says, "Oh, it fosters a greater missionary spirit," and then he quotes. Then he says, "Oh, we converted the barbarians, before greater missionary spirits." If you look at it, the only barbarian tribes that converted to the United Church were the Franks, and the Franks in their first council, some years after being converted, they even make a canon stating that. So it's the Council of Orleans 511, for everybody was, stating that actually the king needs to approve anybody joining the clergy unless they are sons of clergy, which shows that the guys who evangelized the Franks were actually married, were having wives. We're going to talk about the Franks again in the Caesar Papism part. So this is about clerical celibacy. Even today, they will admit that they expanded on it. They added, just like the Pharisees again, burdens that are very hard to hold. I'm not going to comment on the pedophile stuff, but you know about the pedophile stuff. Then he brings up divorce itself. He says, "Oh, is the Orthodox are blushing when you bring up divorce?" No, again, we follow the law. You mentioned the canon of Basil about divorce, and they say, "Oh no, we don't do divorce."
He's like they cite some Greek obscure, Canons of Saint Basil. Really, nobody's heard of him. Who's that?
And even like when he starts talking about this, actually Flanders owns him, saying, "Oh, actually, there's a pope who said you can remarry if one of the spouses is dead." It's already kind of and like Marshall has to do a double take. Say, what? A pope said this? Of course, they're not gonna. Yes, actually, there's a pope who said this.
I think you tweeted that at him too, or you put that in the message, and he was like blocking you as fast as lightning.
No, I tweeted another pope. So this was about remarriage of a dead spouse, if the spouse is dead, which already contradicts the idea that marriage is right. Eternal and so on. It cannot be broken. Aren't you engaged in adultery? Won't you have two wives in heaven if you do this according to your own standards? So yes, that's a problem. And I brought up another canon by a pope. So Pope Eugenius II is second, as a Council of Rome. So this is a pope in a council defining the doctrine of moral, by the way. Pope Eugenius II as a Council of Rome in 826 says that you can actually divorce for adultery, which is biblical, and remarry. So you're not following the Pope here, lad. It's a problem.
By the way, I love this. I'm not trying to. Go ahead.
Super chatted him. It didn't address it. I still want my money back. You owe me €2. So he says that yes. So he says this about divorce. So no, we do not blush. We just follow. If you look at, so then he brings up, you can have four marriage and remarriages. If you look at it, I've never seen it being put into effect. I've never met anybody. We allow remarriage, but the ceremony of remarriage is actually it's a repentance.
Yeah, this random claim he says is from Meyendorff. Meyendorff one time said that there's 4 marriages. Well, you didn't source it. Maybe he did, but who cares? Like I've never heard of that. I've never seen that. When has this actually happened, right?
Yeah, we have rules that say that of course your marriage can fail, and that doesn't mean you have to become a monk because your marriage failed, because it will be arbitrary again. Which but I think we even a canon that say when you remarry 2 times, it's already it's already almost adultery.
Yeah, the canonical, there's like restrictions on it. It gets more and more kind of restricted in terms of how it's viewed. I think those arguments are really terrible and disingenuous when they try to do the moral gotchas. I mean, come on, dude. You as a Roman Catholic, you can't be playing any moral gotchas on anybody else with all of the nonsense of the pedos and Frank's clown masses and puppet masses and all this gibberish. And at the same time, when you admit that all the things that you attack us for are in the Eastern Church that you believe is part of the Roman Catholic Church for the first millennium, so you're just undermining your own argument and your own church every time you do that. It's stupid.
Yeah, on divorce, like since they take a jab at us, I'm going to take a jab too. There are annulment, which is just hypocritical
annulment
divorce.
is a joke. Everybody knows it. Even the trads know annulments are jokes.
Yeah, so annulment is great because it says, it's not a divorce. In all effects, it's a divorce, but it's just showing that the sacrament never happened. First of all, you can have as many annulments as you want because technically you weren't married, which is hypocritical. And something that's interesting is that what happens to whatever happened to your marriage if it failed? Whatever happens to it? Does it mean that children become bastard? Does it mean that if your marriage fails, it just means that you were never married? It just sounds like Schrodinger's adultery.
Schrodinger's adultery. Right.
Yeah, you just can't know whether you were married or not.
And the trads even bitch about the fact that annulments are like there's a zillion annulments everywhere in the Novus Ordo, and it's abused all the time. And but by the way, we have a legality point by which they're doing the exact same thing as the Pharisees. Like we are better than you because we have a legality that allows us to have the appearance of moral superiority over you. When you do the exact same things and you're worse, there's higher rates of divorce amongst them than there are per capita, even amongst Orthodox. Supposedly, Lewis had quotes on that in y'all's stream. By the way, everybody, if you want more than our stream, go listen to David. They touched on a lot of points that I'm not touching on, that we're not touching on. But David, the real Medwhite, I'll link him and Snek and Lewis's stream below here in a little bit. But Schrodinger's adultery, that's hilarious.
Yeah, something that's great also is that annulment is not only a moral problem because there's more grounds for annulment than for divorce. Basically, even in the Catechism of Saint Philip of Moscow, he makes a list of what can be a basis for divorce. It boils down to 2 points really. Which is
how many times can you get annulled? They have infinite allowance for you could conceivably be annulled an infinite number of times.
Yeah. So the Catechism of Philip of Moscow states that basically you have it boils down to 2 points really: adultery and one person being in imminent danger of death. So which is again understandable. And it's perfectly acceptable economia, unless you have to say that a wife has a sacramental duty, to let children being infected by a contagious disease or being beaten up by a drunk husband, which would make you a Pharisee.
Right.
Something else is that annulment bring up a real theological problem, and for people who are so, in love with the great Saint Augustine, we're going to touch on that again. You're creating Donatism because by having an annulment, if your marriage fails, it means that that you don't have sacramental certainty. Because in order to do this, you also have to resort to Protestant thinking. Say, actually, the ministers of these sacraments is not the priest; it's the spouses. Yeah, but isn't it one of the sacraments that the priest can do? Isn't it one of the 7 sacraments of the Church? Mm-hmm. That means that everybody can perform sacraments. Yeah, just like the Protestant thing. So yes, you are creating Donatism. You tell that you're a Protestant, and you're thinking like a Protestant. The keys are to bind and unbind. A priest can reasonably be defrocked. A priest can reasonably bar you from the Eucharist, or the bishop in that case. Same thing can be done with marriage. So we do not blush. We are just consistent. You actually are worse, and you try to hide it, which makes it even worse. Then talk about contraception. We talk about this in the stream with David as well. If you hold us to the same standard as you are, first of all, you allow it right now. The unions allow stuff right now. And just because you do natural family planning doesn't mean that it is not a form of contraception. It is going against natural law.
Also, I wanted to cite Auctorum Fide. I meant to cite this earlier, which is this condemning the Synod of Pistoia, the Jansenists, because actually Auctorum Fide condemns make sure this is a whole document here before I put it up. It actually condemns the SSPX trad position, not just on certain sacraments, but on any of the sacraments, because it condemns the proposition that the Roman See can give defective rights to the church at all. You cannot believe or hold that the Roman See has promulgated defective rights, because that would undermine all of the sacramental unity that the Roman See is supposed to provide. And it was actually the Jansenists, the Synod of Pistoia, which was arguing that the Roman See had made errors and had given defective rights, and that the liturgy should be in the vernacular, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I bring that up is that all of the trads are mad about all of the sacraments after Vatican II. It's not just the sacrament of the Mass and the Latin Mass, and whether the words are valid, the words of institution, which, you know, the decrees after Trent say that you have to use there's a specific valid form, right? And then the whole argument is that the new Mass changes that by using the word for all and not for many. And so every trad knows about that dispute, right? Well, the problem is that the more consistent the trads got, they also got into having problems with the other sacraments, right? So then the priestly rite of ordination becomes a problem. And you get people writing Order of Melchizedek. I think Michael Davies has a book on that. And people analyzing and pointing out how the Novus Ordo, when it did the new rite for ordination of priests, it's very similar to Anglicanism. But if Leo XIII had infallibly condemned Anglican ordinations, then it becomes a problem. And that's where you get the trads who start doubting ordinations for post-Vatican II priests or whatever, right? Now, I'm not interested. I don't really care about that bunch of squabbles anymore. I'm not involved in that world. What I'm trying to say, though, is that all of these sacraments the 7 sacraments underwent revision. And so it doesn't matter whether you say that whether you have a problem with one or all of the changes in the revised sacraments. Auctorum Fide dogmatically condemns the idea, and this condemns all the trads by extension, who aren't sedevacantists. It condemns the idea that the Roman See can promulgate defective, in any sense, rights for the whole church. And most of the trads ultimately end up saying that the texts themselves, the new rights themselves, are defective. Now, not every trad says that. You've got some that say, oh, well, we can reconcile Vatican II with everything before it. But most of them they get to the point where they're honest with themselves and they're like, this doesn't work. Mortalium Animos cannot be reconciled with Vatican II. Right? I mean, they're totally different. They're totally night and day. And then we get Pachamama, right? Obviously, it's a different faith. It's a different thing. But again, I'm just trying to stress that if you're going to be honest with yourself, you're going to be honest with what's in Denzinger, right? The dogmas that you have to hold as a Roman Catholic. If you go back to something like Auctorum Fide, which Auctorum Fide is in here, the condemned proposition, one of those condemned propositions is that the Roman See can give defective rights at all.
Yeah, just a quick side note on the use of vernacular. You see a lot of trads that think that Latin is superior, and actually they do this during this stream. They start by saying something in Latin.
Yeah, they do this magical thing where if they cite the Our Father in Latin, as if that's going to impress everybody and wow them. Because I saw a trad the other day saying that Latin burns the demons greater if you say it in Latin.
Yeah, so
literal Hollywood stuff, right? Like Exorcist Hollywood level stuff.
Yes, also saying that it's a magical language, saying that comparing all high masses depending on if you're using Latin or not. This is exactly worshiping a language, and this is we're going to touch on
magic, right? And this is what you get in the whole. A lot of the mindset of the trad world is magic. It's like God is a technology that I'm forcing into doing my will through. If I perform this ritual perfectly in the Mass, and if I say the words right, and if I don't sneeze during the Mass and commit a moral sin by sneezing, then I can conform God to doing what I want.
Yeah, and you see this very hypocritical, attack on vernacular, saying, "Oh, Latin is superior. It needs to be like it needs to be Latin. It's not a Mass." I've seen someone, literally being idolatrous towards this language by saying that the Elder of Ages is a Tridentine Latin Mass, which is ridiculous. And that's also on the Tridentine Latin Mass. Very quick. At 9 minutes, Flanders says, I cannot be a Protestant because because I can't just do worship like it was done, a way of worshiping that was created 500 years ago. This can be applied to the Tridentine Latin Mass. It's a Protestant inspired Mass to an extent. It was the Council of Trent which condemned Protestant to an extent, but it was also lightened. It contradicted precedent Mass and stuff like this. We go into ritualism, into this use of Latin. This idea that Latin is a super language is ridiculous. This idea that you need to centralize everything on Latin is actually doing the work of the Antichrist again by trying to create what is given mystically and divinely, with the glossolalia, the speaking in tongues, and doing it politically. You're just recreating the curse of Babel. Babel was destroyed because for this reason as well. So that's very good. They also this criticism of vernacular is also totally forgetting the early history, because what is a most trad Bible? It's a Vulgate. Why is it called Vulgate? Because it's a vernacular.
The vulgar.
If the Mass was performed in Latin, it's because it was a vernacular in the first place. And you cannot say that performing in vernacular is bad or has heresy, because you have saints that are literally saints because they even invented vernacular. The Saint Cyril and Saint Methodius, who invented the Glagolitic script, which later became the Slavonic. Precursor to all Slavic languages, are saints because of this. So you're just denying your own saint, your own church again. Talking about the Mass, I'm just gonna, just for the ritualist, I'm just gonna quote what Fortescue, a Roman Catholic historian that writes for the Catholic Encyclopedia, right? Under the entry Liturgy of the Mass, it says that the Liturgy of the Mass that existed in its earliest form in the Roman Mass, as witnessed in Justin Martyr's 2nd century account, is of Eastern type. So just to remind you, there's no supremacy in the Mass. There's no supremacy in stuff like this. And anyway, you have to accept all of Masses because of the unions anyway. That was just a quick side note on languages. Also, this worship of languages, this idolization of languages, you can see it up here in other,
it's superstitious.
Protestant. Like you have the Protestants, the Baptists, who will worship the Bible itself, things that the word
Greek,
of God is.
If we just read the Greek, right, then we'll magically know it.
Yeah, KJV only is, even Islam, they say, if you don't say Shahada in Arabic, it doesn't work. They do the same thing. So at the first minutes, are engaged in idolatry. They don't speak Latin, but it's Latin church. Like we're both under the Russian church. We try to talk in Russia. Do we do Slavonic thing?
Right.
No. Because it's not about the LARP.
We're not LARPers, right? It should always be vernacular for the audience. I want to read real quick quote from Emil. Emil's in the chat. Shout out Emil. But his analysis of their stream was great. When I think he summarized it well. He said the Roman Catholic Church that these trads belong to is like an idealized Platonic form that only exists in their mind. It does not correspond to the actual external world in any meaningful way. This is how their devotion and submission to this imaginary church is an exercise of humility, supposedly, on the one hand, right? And at the same time, they have the ability to disregard anything that the present pope says that they don't like. The idealized pope that exists only in their minds is the source of stability, certitude, and Catholicity in their argumentation. But the real, actual pope that exists in the world, on the other hand, is an apostate who needs to re-enter into communion with their idealized Platonic form of pope, which again has no basis in metaphysical reality. So although they are not sedevacantists, they exactly mimic and operate like the Sadists. If you go watch my streams critiquing sedevacantism from the John Pontrello book, this is the point that Pontrello makes about the sedevacantists, that they have an invisible church in Peter that they're united with, which has no correspondence or connection at all to the actual guy over in Rome, which is known throughout the world as and received as the Roman See, right? So the same thing is true. The same thing is true with these guys. And Emil goes on to say that they're basically doing the same thing as the sedevacantists, even though it's the recognize and resist position of the absurd Roman Catholics who think that 60 plus years of the Roman See has taught error and apostasy. So they're praying for the church, for Francis to come into communion with a pope and Chair Peter in their heads, in their Protestant mindset. They are the Protestants. That's the mind-blowing reality here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna quote them at 56 minutes. They say that they hope that Pope Francis has a massive conversion. To what? To your faith? Isn't he Catholic? Isn't he the standards that makes Catholicism? You're not the standard. He is the standard.
How is that humility? That's like the opposite. He spent this whole stream talking about humility being submitting to the Pope, and then he judges the Pope and says the Pope needs to repent and submit to what I think. What a bunch of contradictory nonsense.
At 119, Rome is failing. Rome is working against the truth. These are his words. That's what he's saying.
But he's
you
humble.
Cannot say this.
Did you know how many? By the way, didn't you count up how many times he talked about his humility?
Yeah. So he talks about his own humility, or he says that other people have a different opinion because of their pride. I've been lenient. I've counted a total of 28 times. Which is when you're humble, you just have to brag about being humble.
Yeah, humble brag. Oh, I'm so humble now. Oh, Seda. Yeah. By the way, Sedas reject the conclavists. So, actually, the conclavists are more consistent than the Sedas. That's the result of the John Petrello Sedevacanta stream that I did. The conclusion of that is that it's actually more consistent within the framework of Vatican I to elect another pope, which technically can't happen in canon law because only the Roman Curia can elect the pope. But regardless, the conclavists at least understand that you can't have a complete defection of the Roman See. That totally denies Vatican I. So technically speaking, ML, I appreciate that super chat, but technically speaking, the Sedas don't accept Pope Michael, but they would actually be a little more consistent if they did. But then you get into the problem of which of the trailer park popes are you going to accept. All right, well, so let's see.
Yeah, moving on. I've got a great point. At 57 minutes, he starts saying that, we need councils. There were councils needed to be assembled, and before that, we had no idea of this existed. We do, and he brings up another argument that just destroys the papacy is Acts 15. He says, look in Acts 15. Yeah, we know Acts 15 because there were councils before even before the emperor stepped in. To make the council ecumenical, which meant imperial. And look at Acts 15. Again, he quotes a council, that's biblical, that destroys his position. In Acts 15, you should read it. It's a short chapter. It's probably the most relevant chapter in terms of ecclesiology in the New Testament. In Acts 15, Peter is here. Peter is not leading.
Right.
You have St. James.
Yeah, they have to go like crazy mental gymnastics to try to fit that into Vatican I.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So St. James is actually leading the council. St. James is a priest. So he's a Levite priest. He's the one who also has the authority, also in the eyes of the people, to lead this council. He says that St. James says that I represent not only the apostle, but he represents the presbyteros, the elders of Israel. So in Acts 15, ultimately, at some point, Peter talks with authority because Peter has some authority of the church. Nobody denies this. Even St. John Chrysostom would say that there were coryphei, plural, people that had authority. That included James, Peter, and John. There's a confusion between which Peter it is, between which James it is. We're going to cover that in a moment. But in Acts 15, ultimately, Peter speaks, but it is James who tells, listen to Peter now. And it is James' declaration that is word for word the apostolic brief. If Peter was a pope with supreme authority, why doesn't he do this? And I'm going to quote St. John Chrysostom on this part, which said... no words speaks John here, no words of the other apostle, they held their peace, for James was invested with the chief rule, and think it no hardship.
Yep.
So yes, here you have James. Like Peter indeed spoke more strongly, but James here more mildly. For thus it behoves one in the high authority to leave what is unpleasant for other to say, while he himself appears in the milder part. Okay, I don't really know, or you can go about this. I don't really know. Acts 15 is for showing that the papacy is true. We even have, historical accounts from Eusebius of Caesarea saying that James was especially prominent. This James, whom the early Christians surnamed the righteous because of his outstanding virtue, was the first, as the record tells us, to be elected to the episcopal throne of the Jerusalem church. Clement, who was a pope, outlines in book 6 puts as Peter, James, and John, after the ascension of the Savior, did not claim preeminence because the Savior had especially honored them, but chose James the righteous as Bishop of Jerusalem. So again, there is a debate, which James, especially in Rome, they start to say that, this James is a lesser, you have you have another James. Anyway, tradition remembers James as a priest. Tradition remembers James especially important, and we even have traditional texts that mention that the priesthood came to the apostle through James, because James was a Levite priest. He was the half brother of Christ through Joseph. So, Joseph being the sacerdotal line, it was especially important. And we need to stress this. And something that's great is James destroyed all the heresies. Saint James, brother of God, destroys all the heresies. Acts 15, he destroys, ultimate supremacy of Rome. In his epistle, he destroys Protestantism, and he also destroys the claims of Judaism and Islam, that we actually lost the covenant. No, James is a hinge that propagates the covenant to the new church. Yeah. I recommend reading the books by Simon Claude Mimony, who is Jewish himself and a great historian, and talks about this, that James was a very important figure for the early church. That he's the one who brought all these things. So yes, very important. Very stupid of them to bring Acts 15. Probably think that reading the Bible is a Protestant thing. Because if you read Acts 15, you'll see that.
I want to stress too this point that you're making about Basil or about James actually continues on in terms of the attitude of the greatest of the. Some of the greatest of the Eastern Fathers, like Saint Basil, right? When Basil writes in letter 66 to Saint Athanasius, he writes a letter and he says, "I have appealed to the bishops of the West for help in this matter regarding an Arian in his diocese at Antioch." Now, by the way, why does he appeal to the bishops? Why does he just ask the Pope, the Bishop of the West? No, he appeals to the bishops of the West, he says, and then he goes on to say that we know that Antioch can function like the head of a body, right? He says the heretics are trying to rend it asunder. He says, but if you, Athanasius, go and fix the problems in Antioch, he says, then Antioch, like a head, will heal the whole body. Now, imagine that if I were to read that, they would say that that's talking about the Bishop of Rome, the head of the whole body. And he's talking about the church in Antioch, right? And he says that the church at Antioch stands as the head, so to speak, of the whole body of the church, and all else are mere disjointed members. Now, it is the prayer of the whole East that this be fixed. And he says, I have asked Rome for help in the next letter. So this issue continues. So he writes a letter next to Meletius of Antioch, who's the head there, right? Now, because the Roman Catholics say, well, but he's not calling the Bishop of Antioch the head of all the churches. Exactly, right? These kinds of phraseologies are used in the Church Fathers, and they're lifted out of that context and used to try to prove the universal supremacy. But that same language is used of the guy who's the lawful Bishop of Antioch. He then writes the next letter to Athanasius, letter 69, and he says, I have again asked Rome for help. He says that, but they have failed to help us because they are men ignorant of the faith. So Rome failed to condemn because they're ignorant and silly, he says. And then he goes on and he writes a letter to Pope St. Damasus. And he doesn't say anything about Pope Damasus being like, the universal greatest head of all churches in the world. He just says, will you please help us? We need help in the East. And there's nothing about any magical Petrine power here when he writes to Pope Damasus. So then... Later, here's the killer, is that later on, when he writes another letter to another bishop, to Eusebius of Samosata, this is letter 239, he says that no help is going to come to us from Rome. He says, because they're a bunch of men ignorant in the faith, and they've actually strengthened the cause of heresy. And he says, because I wrote to their Coryphaeus, the patriarch of Rome, the Coryphaeus of the Western jurisdictions. He doesn't say our mouthpiece, their Coryphaeus. So what I'm getting at is that when you read through these letters, the actual praxis, language, terminology, and usage of St. Basil is nothing like Vatican I. The Roman Catholics come back and revise all this and reinterpret it and say, oh, but it actually is Vatican I because it's an argument from silence, and he's appealing to he's appealing to all the bishops. He appeals to Athanasius. He says, Athanasius, I know that you can fix the problems in Antioch. Right? Why is he doing that? Like, all he has to do is just say, Damasus, fix all the problems. And then he turns around and says that Damasus was the voice, the Coryphaeus, mouthpiece of the Latins. He says, but he was useless. He was useless in this.
Yeah, which, we're going to talk about church fathers now, because he said, church fathers, they approve the papacy. What he doesn't understand, and you've read, they all said, you cannot just cherry pick fathers.
Right, you have to know the context.
It's really hard to read the whole church father, but what they should understand is that if you look at our letters between people of the church are structured, so the letters of the fathers, it always starts with an assessment of the person they're talking to, and it starts by giving great praise. And for example, on his website, he said, actually, you had Saint Theodore of the Studion who said a lot of great things about Rome. Yes, because when Rome is Orthodox, they have no problem giving it all the praise.
Right.
It's fine. But when it is not, we don't. And for example, by taking Saint Theodore of the Studion, he wrote a letter to the Patriarch of Constantinople saying that he's the head of the church.
Yeah, the phraseology, just like with Basil, Antioch, head of the church.
Yeah, so they're quote mining fathers. They're using praise for a lot of things. First of all, when they mean Peter, at the time they mean the episcopate as a whole. We talked about this quite a while, but you cannot just cherry pick this. This is why I hate going into quote mines. The quote that they use are often doctored themselves. I always see them citing second-hand works. I never see them citing the Patrologia Latina, Patrologia Greca, because if you go into these books, and we've seen people coming from the third world, my great friend in Mantua to an extent, Jean Maclean, he went to the PG. It made him apostatize because it's filled with falsification. It's filled with even sometimes admission of we have different manuscripts. We have this stuff that says the Orthodox thing. There is this alternate version of this church father. It's filled with errors. If you read Dullinger actually dug into it, and he has a book on the papacy that's just 600 pages of showing interpolation. In this book, he says that at times you will have 10 layers of falsification. So again, a church father and quote mine, it's a bit difficult to use as is. If you use the same metrics, you will see that just random bishops are the head of the church. Random bishops are described as being the pillar of the faith. Random bishops or priests, as they say that it is great to be in communion with you. You see it from all the fathers. So claiming the father proves the papacy because they say the Pope is doing great when he's doing great things. Orthodox things.
Yeah. Let's talk about. Let's move to Caesaropapism if we can. Have you got more on that?
I think I still had something about church fathers. About church fathers, I just want to address something. He claims, historical fact proves the papacy. Really, if you he quotes Pope Victor. He says that Pope Victor, for example, is saying. The example of Pope Victor and the controversy of Pasha proves papacy. I'm just going to read Eusebius, and we're going to see that it doesn't match anything. Victor, who presided over the church at Rome, not the entire church, immediately attempted to cut off from the common unity the parishes of all Asia. Keyword attempted. He cannot have. He doesn't have this power. Also, the fact that he excommunicates someone, that he tries to excommunicate someone that outside his jurisdiction. Not only the popes did this when they saw heresy or perceived heresy. They would do this. So the parishes of Early Asia, with the churches that agreed with them as heterodox. So saying that they are not orthodox would mean they have a wrong dogma. So that would make this excommunication, ipso facto and infallible. And he wrote letters and declared all the brethren their holy excommunicate, which means that if he really had this supremacy, they would have been excommunicated for real.
Yeah.
But this did not please all the bishops, and they besought him to consider the things of peace. And neighborly unity and love. So here you have the Pope going against unity. Apparently, they gloated about the Pope having this power just after saying that every sort of schism is bad. Words of theirs are extant, sharply rebuking Victor. Among them was Irenaeus, who sending letters in the name of the brethren in Gaul over whom he presided. So you have Victor presiding over brethren in Gaul, which is in the Roman jurisdiction. Why isn't the Pope presiding over Gaul himself?
Yeah, I mean, what do we just see with Basil? Basil writes letters appealing to Athanasius, to Meletius in Antioch, and he writes a letter to Damasus and the bishops in the West. He's trying to secure condemnation from all these people. All he had to do, if Vatican I is true, is get the Pope to just wave his hand.
Yeah. So maintains that the mystery of the resurrection of the Lord should be observed only on the Lord's Day. He fittingly admonishes Victor that he should not cut off the whole churches of God, which observe the tradition of an ancient custom. And what's great about this is that, if there was really, this papal supremacy or even this papal infallibility, nobody would have, complained with it. People are like, oh, because Pope made a decision, this is heretic, let's follow this. The problem is the matter was only resolved at the First Ecumenical Council. So he did not have the authority himself. He tried, he got rebuked. If this happens today, the guy who rebukes the Pope will be excommunicated. Like, even Cardinal Sarah, this base black cardinal, he will say that you have to follow Francis. He apparently doesn't personally agree with Francis, but he doesn't, rebuking.
Yeah, right.
Which apparently some others do.
Yeah, I want to stress this. So, can we move to the Caesaropapism, or do you have any more on that? So, I mean, we can do streams in the upcoming future, near future. We'll address all the papal claims from the Church Fathers individually, and in fact, if you have, I mean, you're welcome to throw more in if you want, but Ubi Petrus just responded to Ibarra, by the way. I'll put that link again in the chat if everybody wants to read on St. Maximus the Confessor, how Ibarra attempted to use this to prove Vatican I in Maximus. So there is Ubi responding to that.
I will let Ubi Petrus do this. I'll just quickly state about historical council again. They had a pope who made an heretical council. Pope Liberius, who was rebuked by the church, who promoted Arian creeds. Isn't it? You don't have to follow this. They say we can't have any more councils. We actually have an ecumenical council. We had the 8th ecumenical council, that was the 14th synod, that was approved by Pope John VIII, which means that it also is in Italy destroys this claim that we have a disagreement over the filioque. We do not have a disagreement over the filioque, right? Because we have this 8th council. The 9th synod is fully in effect. We don't have different disagreements over the energies. We sing Palamas. He
says that we don't even know if the energy doctrine is true. What are you talking about? I've never heard an Orthodox theologian deny the doctrine of uncreated energies. It's in our liturgy. Everybody that I know of holds to the Synod of Blachernae and the uncreated energies. It's in the liturgy. I've never heard anybody not say this. Now, David Bentley Hart. We don't even know if David Bentley Hart attends a church, right? He just says he's Orthodox, and says everything anti-Orthodox, rejects ecumenical councils that condemn Origen. You have an entire book, Christ in Byzantium, about Blachernae, which contains all the documents of Blachernae. By the way, great book by Papadakis. And he says we don't even know if the essence energy doctrine is true. What a bunch of nonsense! There's not a single Orthodox theologian in the 20th century and the ones that are becoming saints, like St. Justin Popovich, right? You can read the famous Georgios Mantzarides has a whole book on Palamos. You can read Father Staniloy. His whole systematic theology is premised on the essence-synergy distinction. You can read Father Florovsky, powerful proponent of the essence-synergy distinction. You can read Vladimir Losky, all of the greatest theologians who they didn't once cite. They didn't once cite a great theologian. They cited who, where, Bulgakov, and Saul, like weirdos, right?
Yeah. Which is disingenuous. We're not attacking Catholic morals and dogma by quoting specifically James Martin.
Oh yeah, let's just cite James Martin and say that's all of Roman Catholicism, right?
We're going to talk about Roman Catholicism at James Martin. What does James Martin say about this?
Right.
So yes, Bulgakov is a sociologist. Is a heretic. This is ridiculous. I think we can. It says, oh, you need the emperor to convene the council. No, we actually do not need the emperor to convene the council. We convene the Council of Jerusalem. They say, oh, but that's just receptionalism. The real Medwhite has a great video about receptionalism.
Roman Catholics teach receptionism. That's the irony here.
Yeah, he's being a full receptionist. They even say, oh, actually, they call us sola scriptura plus church father. But they say, oh, but we have the Pope. But when they don't agree with the Pope, they say, oh, but we can look in tradition. So you're doing sola scriptura plus church father.
Yeah, they do the same thing. Well, they do sola scriptura with papal writings. That's their thing.
Yes. So yes, they teach.
Let me pick I like Mirari Vos. I like Mortalium Animos. I like Lamentabili Scene. I like Pacendi Dominici Gracious. I like Humanum Genus of Leo XIII. I don't like the encyclicals after Vatican II. So pick and choose the encyclicals that you want, trads, because you're just being Protestant.
Yeah. Also, yes, of course, we do not need the emperor to convene council. Acts 15 is a great example. It was not convened by the Roman Empire.
By the way, there are councils prior to to Nicaea, right? There is Ankara.
And there were councils after that.
And there are councils after that. And so, the normative, so it's 300 years of Christianity without an ecumenical council. Okay, so the ecumenical councils are not the normative way that the church is governed. They happen sparsely every 100 years. So there's this assumption that Orthodoxy lacks ecumenical councils is really misses the point of how the church is actually in praxis governed, which is synodally. So every church everybody who's Orthodox, their church is part of a synod of bishops. So that's the normative way the church is governed. What do you mean there's not? We don't have to have, for the church to survive, an ecumenical council. And even the Vatican admits that the Orthodox churches have existed for the last 1,000 years as Orthodox without the papacy.
Yeah.
That proves that we don't need the papacy.
There's a quote from the document of Curtis is great. Point 16, this document signed by the Pope. In the West, the primacy of the See of Rome was understood particularly from the 4th century onwards with reference to Peter's role among the apostles. The primacy of the Bishop of Rome among the other bishops was gradually interpreted as a prerogative. Yep. That was his because he was successor of Peter, the first of the apostle. This understanding was not adopted in the East, which had a different interpretation of Scripture. And further on this point, the old document of Ketty is about synodality being very important, and synod by themselves, by their very nature, refuting the idea that you just need a centralized authority.
Right, and that whole stream, by the way, was basically just a worship of authority. And the irony here, I want to make a point about, because a lot of people don't know this, but if you read the documents of the Second Synod of Nicaea II in 787, he made this goofy mistake of talking about how, well, the whole church in the East is Caesaropapism, and they followed emperors. And did you not know, have you not read, he hasn't, by the way, have you not read the actual canons and acts of the councils that are at least in English so far? Because you might be surprised to see the way that your own popes, and these are our popes too. Like we would agree with the Seventh Synod and the popes at this time. But in your mindset, in his mindset, the Catholic Church is the church of the first millennium. Oh, guess what? Who do they say are the emperor? The emperors are the God-ordained emperors. The God-ordained emperors. That's a phrase from Nicaea too. That's the letter. If you read, if you have the shaft set, it's the letter of the synod. There's two letters. There's the letter of the synod to the emperor and the empress. And what do they say? They say, you reign like David. They talk about theocracy. They talk about them being the orthodox imperium. And so on his own grounds, his church for the first millennium admits symphonia, the very thing he says is Caesaropapism, which is goofy.
Yeah, and what's great is that there will, like, any times there is an interaction between the church in the East, between church and state in the East, they will say it's Caesaropapism. Yes. Well, first of all, you're excommunicating, the entire church and Byzantine Empire, which you claim you are united to.
Right.
And also, it happens in the West. You claim at some point during your prosperity gospels that you converted the barbarians. The Franks, when they were converted, the first things they put into place was Caesaropapism. They put Symphonia into place. Look at Saint Gregory of Tours. He writes a history of the Franks, the Merovingians. The Merovingians, not only were Orthodox, because Byzantium recognized them as Orthodox. The emperor who was Orthodox sent them, consular titles, all kind of glory. But they had Orthodox ecclesiology. And if you look at the Franks, in history of the Franks, they are talking about first of all, rights that they don't have anymore, but also the fact that there was this link, the clergy was sort of an administrative class. There was a very strong link throughout French history. Actually, we will see it with Gallicanism between the clergy and between the state. Is the first councils that the Franks made. So Clovis converted at the end of the 400s. In 511, they already made a council that stayed relevant, that states that you cannot enter the clergy unless you have unless the king is with you. So can you really claim you converted France? No, because they didn't convert to papism. They converted to Orthodox Symphonia. That's at the very beginning of the conversion, the reconversion of the West after the barbarian invasions. You can see it throughout papal history. You can see, for example, Charlemagne trying to challenge things. Charlemagne putting so this is not the same, like, I'm not saying that Charlemagne was Orthodox. I'm saying the Merovingian were Orthodox. Right. We have a good claim for this. Charlemagne started to introduce heresy. Charlemagne wanted to create a parallel authority. But, for example, with Pepin,
the Avignon papacy is another rebuttal to this nonsense.
Yeah. They even acknowledge when they say, there's an institution crisis. Yes, because at some point the emperor was putting out, choosing the pope.
Yeah, the pope was the office of the papacy being hoarded out to these nobility.
Yeah,
and they don't even know this.
Yeah, you have, like, for example, Charlemagne wanted to bring the Filioque. He tried to make his own parallel authority of the church. Pope Leo III rebuked him, said no. He made counter-council, wrote that you cannot change a creed, and ultimately it's a descendant of Charlemagne, Otto the First, who wants to recreate the empire of Charlemagne, that instates the Filioque in Rome by, coming to Italy, saying, oh no, it's a Holy Roman Empire, removing the Pope, putting out his own preferred Pope, and say, no, these things of Filioque. That's how the Filioque came into place. So, it's really, if you look at the whole history of the church, even later, the Gallican church, it didn't really answer to Rome. If you look at it, Goethe was a Gallican priest, and he said, this ecclesia promoted by Vatican I, this full answer, answering to Rome, it doesn't work like this. The Gallicans, when the Pope tried to be more ultramontane, bring more power. So he actually had the same arguments that we do, bring up councils. You had the King of France at some point, Louis XIV, stating that, the Pope is a vicar, but I am the lieutenant of God. You had kings, after declarations of, after some declarations of supremacy by the Pope, you had kings sending in commandos. That's for real. That's a real thing that happened. You had sending our militiamen, our army, capturing the Pope, holding him hostage.
Holding him hostage, right?
Yeah, you had Pepin, trying to creating the papal state, to vassalize the papal state. The Avignon papacy is the same thing. If any interaction between church and state in the East is Caesaropapism, guess what? You're even more Caesar-papist. And your answer to this was papal Caesarism, which was
Papalo-Caesarism.
and there's a Pope.
And by the
But the
way,
problem,
that doesn't end in the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. That continues all the way up to the time of the election of Leo XIII, because as every trad knows, you all know, if you're a studied trad, about the story of Cardinal Rampolla. I'll put the old Catholic Family News article in the chat. You can see it there, preserved at Free Republic, which is it's from 2003. Did the Freemason Cardinal Rampolla almost become Pope? And what does every trad say about Freemasonic infiltration? Oh, that's who's ruining us. Oh, that they got us, and all this stuff, right? And what's the story of Cardinal Rampolla? The Austro-Hungarian emperor had the power of vetoing a certain election to the papacy. So literally, they believe that their papacy was saved by Caesaropapism in this story that all the trads believe, for the most part. I'm sure there's some trad who doesn't believe it, but most trads, most SSPX, most Sedevacantists believe this story about Cardinal Rampolla, and he was prevented from election because the cardinals were going to elect him because the Austrian emperor knew. And so the Austrian emperor had this veto power over certain people being elected by the cardinals. So, but when that happens, it's not Caesaropapism, it's good, you see. But there's countless examples of this kind of stuff. And so for them to call it Caesaropapism on our side is just total dishonesty and ignorance. I mean, do they really not know any of this stuff?
If you call this Caesaropapism, it means that the West was never really Catholic. And, actually, that's the truth. If you look at their anathematism against this kind of organization, if you look at the history of France from Clovis, the first king who converted to Vatican I, they had the Gallican organization. If this is anathema, it means that France was never Catholic because France adopted a law of secularization after Vatican I, because they considered that it was a treachery, that it incited treachery against the nation. Yeah, way to be a nationalist.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
that's funny.
This is really like this whole claim of Caesaropapism.
And by the way, as you pointed out too many times, the Council of Constance actually solves the problem of when they have multiple so-called claimants to the papacy. Now, I thought the papacy was there to solve the problems of disunity, but what about the Council of Constance?
Yeah, Council of Constance is great because you have many people who bring up the Council of Florence. So Council of Florence, a four-part council that was preceded by the Council of Constance. And in the Council of Constance, there is a consular document that was signed by the Pope, that was chosen by the council. It is called Haec Sancta. You can look it up. And it's used by the trads today to try to remove papal authority, right. Interestingly. And Haec Sancta states that the council is above the Pope. And ultimately, it is because of the promulgation of conciliarism with Haec Sancta during the Council of Constance that that many Eastern bishops said, "Oh, maybe we can mend the schism with this. Maybe we should try to have a discussion." So, at the Council of Basil, you have the first Eastern bishops coming, and then of course Florence, because we came to Florence because we're like, oh, this guy just promulgated Haec Sancta in an ecumenical council presided by the Pope, signed by the Pope 20 years ago. These guys are not going to contradict themselves so drastically over the course of 20 years, but they did. Florence was a big trap. The real Medwite has a whole show if you have the Council of Florence, but the Council of Florence itself contradicts the other councils. So it's, they would say, oh, this magisterium is perfect, it doesn't contradict. You have two councils that radically contradict one another. It is after schism, so they should theoretically know about it.
Right, they should. Right. Another thing I want to address that I think you guys mentioned on y'all stream, which was the ever appealed to. You guys in Byzantium fell to Islam because of your Eastern Orthodoxy. Do you know who was in union with who when Byzantium fell? Do they not know this?
Yeah, so they should know this. So first of all, the East in general. So first of all, you're creating a schism again because the entire East, like most of the Patriarchate of the East, fell to Islam in full communion with Rome. This includes, but is not limited to, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and even Byzantium. Byzantium fell under a Uniate emperor, and we cannot accept him as if you see is Constantine XI, he was is a brother of Emperor Johannes. Emperor Johannes even killed and martyred, ordered the killing of many Athonite priests because they refused a union. He wanted union So yes, Constantinople fell. Was it forget to understand that there even was a contingent of papal and Venetian ships that came to help. So yes, if the fact that Constantinople fell is a curse on Orthodoxy, it means that it's Roman Constantinople that fell.
Yeah, and if we're going to start reading the curses of what's going on in civilization, then Western civilization has been cursed by being Roman Catholic, and the degeneracy and the apostasy that we see can be blamed on. I mean, come on, that's a ridiculous way to try to read the tea leaves and the omens.
Again, they call us Protestant, but this is prosperity gospel. They forget that Rome was the Roman Patriarchate was also invaded. Like today, all of Northern Africa, which was at one point the beating of the Roman jurisdiction, is today still Muslim. What can we say? Look, they say, oh, you splinter in all different branches. Right. We never splintered in different branches. People went away from the church. He said, oh, you have the old calendarists, you have Sedevacantists. It's the same thing. Oh, you have the old ritualist. Some group went away. Actually, we were back in union with many of them, but. If I use this metric to determine truth, first of all, it means that Islam, who took over all these places, is maybe true. Muslims believe this. They say, oh, he's the one who will conquer Constantinople as the right faith. I can say that Protestantism, Protestantism comes from Rome. They are sons of Rome. Maybe they are true. Maybe they are the truth. They are the one who evangelize more. The Pachamama Synod was to prevent too hard an evangelism in the beating heart of Roman Catholicism. So yes, this is really weird. A prosperity gospel says, oh, we evangelize more than you. We evangelize a barbarian. Already showed that the barbarian were not evangelized to Roman Catholic faith.
They call syncretism evangelism, right? I mean, go to New Orleans, go down to the Congo, and see if that's legitimate Christianity.
Yeah, you have people like who call themselves Christians because they were evangelized by Rome, who practice ritual cannibalism. They have Pachamama worship. These kind of things didn't appear after Vatican II. This is how they were evangelized. They were evangelized.
This is the old enculturation of the Jesuits. And again, I know there's different types of enculturation, but my point is that the syncretistic approach of Roman Catholicism is not real evangelism.
Yeah, so we can even say, like, did you evangelize these people? I don't know, because right now we see that you never did evangelize these places. It's coming back to Rome. So yes, I talk about it in my stream that I had with you about the Jesuits. So yes, this is really a weird kind of prosperity gospel. We evangelize more people than you. If you look at who re-evangelized, like at some point he says, who did the Greek ever evangelize? Well, the Latins. If you look at how Christianity is spread,
that's a great point.
It's like if we evangelize someone, like the first we evangelized, were you.
I'm going to let you, if you have any of the last points you want to get to. I'm not trying to rush you, but I got a few more points I want to make, and then maybe we'll wrap this up because we're almost 3 hours, which is a good stream. I think we've dealt with most of the big ones, but I'll let you have the floor, and then we'll do the super chats. I got 1 point I want to get to, and then I'll let you finish here, and then I'll do my point, and then we'll do the super chats. And by the way, I'll put their stream into the description of the show. I did share it on my channel in the community tab, so you guys can find their stream there. But if you're watching this, months down the road or a year from now or whatever, I'll put David and everybody streaming here, and I have the original link to Taylor Marshall's stream too. So, but David and Lewis and Snek, I'll have their response in the description of the show as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we covered some other points in the other stream, so let's not make it too redundant. Ultimately what I want to say is that their own point is to say that we are a weighted branch. We are a weighted branch because we do not have the authority to do a whole lot of things because they worship authority and not God. Actually, we show that we still have this authority. We still keep to the canons. We still are able to have councils that are accepted by tradition. And at the same time, it makes the point that Rome itself is not using its power. That it has potency, but it's not using it. How can I say that if there is no display of this of this power? How can I say that you are not the withered branch? As Paul says,
Right.
Rome can
Exactly.
Rome can be grafted out, and you cannot say that you have tranquility in mind by saying, oh, the Pope will resolve thing. Oh, this is going to be a triad Pope. This Pope is elected by the people that he names, the cardinals. The cardinals are all paused. He says, oh, it's actually it's the only way out. I quote him 1 or 20. The papacy is the way out for the problem caused by the papacy, because without the papacy you wouldn't have these problems in the first place. If you this is the problem. Like Vatican II will not be so damaging if you didn't have if you didn't have the papacy. Also, if you have a superior ecclesiology, why is your church in this kind of crisis? Why do you have to say that it is the worst crisis ever? Even when we had the Aryan crisis and all these things. So yes, ultimately, the existence of Flanders was a unit, and the existence.
Yeah.
So just the fact that they exist of Marshall was a trad. Disprove their claims about the papacy and proves the double standards. That will be my final point. We've covered many other points. There's probably, I don't know, 10 hours of streams that we can do.
You could keep going and going and going. I want to stress that too, that if we understand what's going on in the Ukraine, which he didn't really want to talk about, he goes, I don't even follow it. I don't know what's going on there. Well, the NATO CIA intelligence structure is essentially trying to use things like uniatism and ecumenism in the Ukraine to split up that Orthodox Church and create a schismatic CIA NATO-controlled USA creation Orthodox non-canonical church, right? That's what's going on. And so when he talks about all this stuff, I think he's being somewhat disingenuous because he studied at the Ukrainian Catholic University. He knows what ecumenism is. His whole research project was ecumenism. And since trads love conspiracy theories, let's get into a conspiracy theory that I know quite a bit about because I was a trad and I used to talk about it. What about the fact that if you read the biography of the Rockefellers, which is their authorized biography by Collier and Horowitz, Chapter 9, which deals with their funding and creation of the ecumenist movement as we know it today. I mean, certainly ecumenism existed prior to the Rockefellers. But Chapter 9 the whole chapter is about them putting money into and steering the ecumenist movement and its connection to things like the CIA, which are very closely tied to the Rockefeller family. Now, to extend that into the modern world and how it's relevant, dear trads, there are trads on your side who have written extensive books that detail, right, how the CIA has utilized the Catholic Church, especially at the time of and after Vatican II in their doctrinal warfare program, to steer and subvert other countries, to make the Catholic Church into an engine of Americanism. And what's happening in the Ukraine is exactly this right here. So you really wanted to blow Ned Flanders' mind, it would be something like this, right? The CIA's doctrinal warfare program, and the CIA is behind ecumenism. It's one of their pet projects, and that's proven in the Rockefellers' authorized biography. I know about that, and I've talked about it for a long. And it's not just me. David Wimhoff is a trad cat lawyer. He's a Latin Mass only trad cat lawyer. He's written a 800-page book, 1,000 footnoted, massive treatise to prove this. So that's also at play here, right? We can talk about all the theology, but we can't leave out the geopolitical elements because they tried to talk about the geopolitical elements. And if you want to play the blame game, who's to blame here? The same CIA that controls the papacy and that runs that whole jibber jabber since Vatican II, which Wimhoff has documented. If you want to talk about geopolitical issues, that's the problem in Ukraine, not orthodoxy.
Yeah. It's really sad that they didn't bring any theological point because.
By the way, yeah, they did this whole stream, and did they even talk about any theology? It's just problem this, problem that, emotional appeal. Why I feel like you should be Orthodox because I got the burning in my bosom, and they have all these problems.
KGB priest,
Oh right, yeah.
Even though like today their priests are teaching socialism openly, they're teaching, this.
The Roman Catholic Church is full of liberation theology, socialism, Marxism, and they want to play the blame game and call everybody in the Orthodox Church KGB. That's utterly ridiculous.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't touch on Soloviev. It's sad.
Oh yeah. So Soloviev, I've read Soloviev. I've read the book that he cited that he thought was this great papal apologetic for the papacy. The problem with Soloviev is that he's part of those Russian Gnostic guys who basically want the papacy to be this giant globalist humanitarian thing where he's the head of all the world religions, and that's how we'll have a new humanist global utopia peace type thing going on.
Yeah. And the works by Goethe are an answer to Soloviev. But yes, again, it's the idea of creating what is given by God mystically, creating it politically. You cannot have this kind of unity. You're actually fighting this unity. Marshall, it's really bad to quote this. He was a huge ecumenist. He said that every schism is caused by pride. On the other stream, I explained why, point by point, this schism was caused by Rome on false premises of the false authority, according to Rome today. So yes, it's really weird to quote to quote Soloviev, and Soloviev is just another proof that before Vatican I, if there is any symptom of infiltration in the Orthodox Church, if there is any kind of infiltrator, any kind of ecumenist, any kind of like weird Gnostic, the first symptom of infiltration in the Orthodox world is wanting to go to your church.
That's a great point. Yeah. By the way, if Tim is a master super ecumenist, did his grad work in ecumenism, why is he on Taylor Marshall's stream? Doesn't Taylor Marshall have a problem with ecumenism? It just makes no sense.
Yeah, I mean, their positions separately are incompatible with Rome, with early church history, and like.
Yeah, but in the Roman Catholic system, you can have anything. Like you can be all over the place as long as you accept the umbrella of the Pope. That's really what Roman Catholicism is just the acceptance of the Pope. You can have whatever theological nonsense you want. You can believe in uniatism and orthodoxy, basically, or you can believe it be a trad cat, Latin Mass, or you can believe in the Filioque or not. You can accept a Saint Isaac the Syrian as a saint, or you can think he's a heretic. You can be an ecumenist, or you can be anti-ecumen. It's all. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's not about it's not about God. It's about temporal submission.
Right.
Which if the church always was not about God and about temporal submission, we would just have accepted Pax Deorum.
There wouldn't be any martyrs. There would be no martyrs.
Yeah, like we would never have become a church, and this is a proof that this is what the papacy wants. It's not trad. It's not based. Even their more radical takes. They are just an early form of globalism, of humanism.
Right.
Actually, that's what Soloviev says. That the problem in the East is that they are too mystical. They are too turned towards God.
Yeah, they don't want the political union of mankind.
Yeah, and like what he praises Rome for being humanist. And today they're fighting against this. If Soloviev is why you leave the church, just read Goethe answers Soloviev. And Soloviev, it's just the Antichrist field book is how to create a global empire.
It's the Grand Inquisitor, right? This is the thing that Grand Inquisitor offers to Jesus in the famous chapter of Brothers Karamazov is the reverse of the three temptations of Christ, right? The Grand Inquisitor is the prediction of the Antichrist status of the papacy. And so the papacy absolutely fulfills those three temptations in terms of reversing Christianity and turning it into a humanistic institution. And so it is the forerunner to Antichrist. So Sadie Rochelle, $5. She says, thank you guys, loud and clear. Thomas W, $2. Lewis needs a wrench. He got a wrench. Shining Diamond for $5 says, do you think Taylor Marshall will get grafted out of Rome for his conservative views? I mean, excommunications in Rome are really hard to procure. They only do it every now and then to hardcore trads. You got to be like a SSPX, or they'll do the occasional throw a bone and excommunicate some woman nun who thinks she's going to be a priest. That's all. That's really to actually get excommunicated in Rome is pretty hard. So I doubt they would ever actually visually do that. I think what will happen with Taylor Marshall is that he'll gradually evolve more and more trad, but he'll realize that is not great for his business model, his branding. So he'll have to make a decision between being more and more trad or losing some of his branding. So who knows
Yeah,
where he'll go?
there's actually a case to be made that he might already be outside of the church lata essentia, like ipso facto, because of the tradition that he takes that are opposed to the magisterium, opposed to the word of the Pope. If you want to be legalistic, he might already be outside of his own church that he's promoting.
Yeah, I mean, all the trads, technically speaking, reject the magisterial authority of the Roman bishop for the last 60 years. So, technically, you could say they're all outside of the church for
Yeah,
rejecting 60 years of
lata essentia,
magisterium.
like it's ipso facto. So they are in the conditions that it could apply to it.
Right.
Really.
But will there be an actual bishop excommunicating him? No. I mean, that won't happen. Let's see. Nabil Fida, £5. He asks you in French. He says, "Pour que la France redevienne orthodoxe." Orthodoxe.
Yeah. La France a été orthodoxe depuis qu'elle s'est convertie sous Clovis. France was always Orthodox, and we're working on this. No, it was not always Orthodox, but it started out as Orthodox and it evolved. But we're working on this. We've got monasteries. We've got a lot of great books that have been translated. We've got a lot of sources from the Gallicans who fought against papalism. So yes, we are making converts on our servers through.
Yeah, I've
through
seen
all
videos
kind
of monastery, old dead Roman Catholic monasteries and churches being bought in France by Orthodoxy.
Yeah, we have many of those all these churches they are coming back into our jurisdiction. The relics that were forgotten, the saints that were forgotten, because all this history was pushed aside after Vatican I. This is being revived, and we're here. And Orthodox is not a Russian thing, it's not a Greek thing, it's been Western. It's like France was Orthodox before it was even France. Yeah. So yes, it's important that we stress this.
Okay, Evan Schultz, $30. Wow, thank you, Evan. Evan's always generous with those super chats. We really appreciate that, man. Thanks so much. Dalton, $10. Father David Smith says Greeks have an agreement with diaspora OO to perform baptism and sacraments for them in the event that an Oriental Orthodox has no church. Is this acceptable? Now, on the surface, I don't know about this event. I don't know who David Smith is, but I would say this does not sound acceptable. It sounds like Greek Orthodox Archdiocese engaging in some ecumenism. And so ecumenism is not a problem unique to Roman Catholicism or Orthodoxy or Protestantism. It's pretty much a problem for everybody. So, but I don't know about this.
Yeah, but we don't believe in poisonous communion. No, it's not, right, because there's been an abuse here and there that it corrupts the old communion. We're not Donatists. Actually, right. There is a Medvard plugging in again shows that if you do this, there's never been a real church. There's always been some fringe movements. There's always been some abuse.
Right, canonical violations also.
One head to correct.
Canonical violations don't immediately make you and all of your friends diseased and damned. The church never operated that way. There's always kind of a period, and that's why one of the things that they didn't understand was that he called it a schism between the EP and Moscow. It's not a schism yet. There's just the removal of communion, and so it's the stage before that. So schism would be when there's an excommunication. So Thomas W., you need to do a live stream with Church of Eternal Logos. Yeah, I forgot about him. I didn't, not because I'm being rude. I just got busy, and I told him that I'd like to have him on, and we could do a great discussion because I appreciated his Kurgan video that he made. Franklin Chan, $15.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, we need to get
actually, I would probably do a stream with him soon.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you do it, and then I just need people to remind me because, even with this stream with Snek, I forgot we were going to do a stream, and I get so busy I forget things. But Franklin Chan, by the way, I was supposed to do a stream with Owen Cyclops, and I forgot we're going to do a stream. So there's a bunch of stuff to come. Don't worry. But thank you for that super chat, Franklin Chan. Hosehead, $20. Thank you, Hosehead, $20. And now we got the mega super chat. Wow, I don't think anybody's ever given a $250 super chat. Wow, what a blessing. By the way, I'll send some of this Snek's way since he's done a lot of research and help. So he deserves some of these super chats. He says, Jay, my family and I were received into the Orthodox Church and we left Protestantism. You were a vital part of that. Keep up the good work. Well, God bless you, Exodus 580. I remember seeing your super chats and your comments, and we're glad that you made your way to Orthodoxy. I think you will enjoy it. Hopefully you have a good, solid local church there, and I'm glad to hear that. That's an amazing gift of generosity there. Much appreciated. Nicodemus the Pharisee, $5. You make a strong case, but what about Matthew 16, 17 to 18? Where does the church built on Peter promise that it would not fail? Well, again, most of the church fathers have a varying exegesis of Matthew 16, 17 to 18. Most of them do not say it's only Peter. Matthew 18 says the exact same thing to the entire college of the apostles. So we don't think that there is an honor given to Peter because he's the first to confess that. But all of the office of the keys, whether it's remitting and retaining sins, preaching the gospel and doing the sacraments, right? The exercise of jurisdiction, these elements of what it is to be a bishop are to the whole. It's said in Matthew 18, the exact same thing is said to all of the apostles. So the fact that it said to Peter first does not equal Vatican I, and that's all we have to show to disprove Roman Catholicism is that it doesn't equal Vatican I, and that's what they have to demonstrate, and they can't. So Denny has a great book, Papalism, and then there's Gattei's great book on the papacy. Those all deal with this perennial usage of Matthew 16. Emil Surik, $5.
It's really
Go ahead.
We need to understand that it's retro-engineered, dogma. And that's why there are problems. That's why all the historians, before Vatican I, they had the epidemic of historians, Catholic historians leaving the church. Dullinger and Mette were some of the most brilliant minds of their time. Effeli had to be bribed, to be threatened with removal of his university chair. It doesn't matter with history. And which is ridiculous because they claim, we've got history on our side, we've got tradition on our side. Once they talk to Protestants, but it really doesn't.
Well, how come they never explain? They never go to Matthew 18. They always quote Matthew 16. They don't ever look at Matthew 18. They don't look at the fact that Christ breathed on all the apostles and said, remit and retain sins.
Which is very Protestant. We're just picking a verse.
Just pick Matthew 16 and then say everything's built on that. And then when you ask them, how do you know? Why do you follow the Bible? The answer is because of the Pope, right? The Pope gave you the Bible. And why do you know that the Pope exists? Because Matthew 16, the Bible. So it's a circular argument that they base everything on when they have a dogmatized epistemology and anthropology that rejects circular arguments at a fundamental level. Vatican I does not accept circular arguments. It says that all of these claims are proven merely by looking at the historical evidences and tallying them up. Emil Surik, $5. The Sedas. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. The Sedas will not accept Pope Michael, but Pope Michael is more consistent than the Sedevacantists because Pope Michael at least understood that you can't have the Roman See defecting indefinitely or for 60 plus years. Nate Mott, $5. I went to an Orthodox service for the first time. It's OCA. Do you have any advice regarding the OCA? I'm fairly new to your content. There's good and bad OCA churches, so there's not any one size fits all. You just have to take it a case by case basis. But I can't say on every single case. But thank you for that super chat. I went to Antiochian for a while. I'm not anti-Antiochian, but eventually I moved over into ROCOR, and I really enjoy my experiences in ROCOR. So. Hans Lara, $10. Thank you, Hans, for that super chat. Let's see. Let me scroll back here. And once again, I do want to thank Exodus 580 for that really big super chat. Jared Fetzer had a $5 one, and that seems to have disappeared. I don't know what happened there, but I don't see any more super chats. We've gone for 3 hours. Whew. I'm starting to my mind's starting to turn to mush after 3 hours of chatting. But hopefully we dealt with
at least 2 hours.
Say what?
It can easily have been 2 more hours, but yes,
could, yeah.
There's also arguments that are brought up in the other stream, so you can go watch the other stream. But this thing was a blunder. This thing was really bad. These people are supposed to be doctors. They fall into really bad apologetics. They fall into trying to characterize us. They fall into trying to do a psychoanalysis. Oh, do you have daddy issues? No, because you're not the dad. You're the one who left, and then
you're not our
retarded child called Protestantism. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all right. A bunch of bad arguments, disinformation, and appeals to emotion is really the essence of it, and conducted at a really low level. I mean, it touched on no theology, all just claims about historical squabbles and problems. and humanistic appeals to Soloviev and this kind of stuff. Jared Fetzer, $5. Can you have the Holy Spirit without apostolic succession? If you mean in the sense of like an institutional body having the Holy Spirit, like in terms of are there graces in those groups and outside the church? Sure. Do they have the ability to confect the Eucharist and that kind of stuff? No. They do not have that kind of Holy Spirit sacramental grace, but certainly people in those churches have experiences of grace and graces from the Holy Spirit. But the point is that you need
we do not decide where the Spirit goes.
But you need orthodoxy.
This is a case of pride.
Right. But you need orthodoxy.
The Holy Spirit is not confined. We do not know. And, the Holy Spirit is God. We do not choose what God does, And it's not like this flow chart or RPG
Right.
that tells you how it works. We cannot know how God works precisely. That's the point of God being God.
Okay. All right, I'm almost about to fall over. I'm so tired. I got to have some food. But thank you, everybody. Hopefully, we dealt with Taylor Marshall and Ned Flanders in a sufficient way. I think you'll see the quality and depth of the content that we provide in comparison to the just really surface level basic bitch arguments that they gave is I think pretty noteworthy. Hopefully, you appreciate that. Thank you to Snek for coming on, and thank you to David and Lewis for their stream. And I'm sure that more people will be making responses to them in the future. And be sure and share this with your Catholic friends because we dealt with it in detail. We're going into the depth here, not sticking to that kind of normie surface level stuff that they did. And that's all I've got. Anything else you want to say?
Send all this to them. I want to see their reaction.
All right. God bless everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.
All right, thanks, man. That was really good.
Oh, yeah. 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, man. Have a good night.
Call ended.